He controlled an empire that made governments nervous and rival bosses disappear. He could end careers with a phone call, silence enemies with a glance, and move millions across 3 continents before breakfast. Lucian Moretti was not a man you left. He was a man you survived, if you were lucky. But on a Tuesday morning in October, his pregnant wife packed one small bag, set her wedding ring on the kitchen table, and walked out the front door while his guards watched the perimeter and never thought to watch her. The most feared mafia boss in America had just been outmaneuvered by the one person he never considered a threat, the woman he married. And nothing, not his money, not his soldiers, not 20 years of ruthless power, would ever be the same again. If this story already has you hooked, stay with me until the very end. Because what happens between these two people will shake you. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. The morning Lucian Moretti's world quietly collapsed. The weather was unremarkable. No storm, no omen. Just a gray October sky pressing down over the Hudson River, like a lid on something boiling beneath the surface. The city moved the way it always did. Indifferent, mechanical, crawling with taxis and delivery trucks, and people who never looked up. From the 43rd floor of the Moretti private residence, the whole of Manhattan looked like a circuit board that ran on human desperation. Lucian had been awake since 4. He'd slept maybe 90 minutes, which was more than most nights. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window in his shirt and trousers, jacket still draped over the back of his desk chair, a coffee going cold on the credenza beside him. His phone had buzzed 17 times in the last hour. His attorney, his consigliere, 2 separate capos checking in before the morning briefings, and something from the Belandi security group that he hadn't opened yet. Today was the divorce hearing. He'd been building toward it for 3 months, quietly, methodically, the way he built everything, with patience and precision and a clear picture of the outcome before the first move was made. Elena would receive the settlement his lawyers had prepared, the Connecticut house, a monthly transfer that amounted to generosity by any standard, and full medical coverage through the end of her pregnancy and 18 months following. She would sign. She would leave. She would disappear into whatever life she chose, and the Moretti name would continue on in the hands of the man who had spent 20 years making it mean something. It was clean. It was fair. It was over. He turned from the window and walked down the hallway toward the master bedroom. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe he'd left his watch on the nightstand. Maybe some other mechanical habit was pulling him. He pushed the door open. The bed was made. That wasn't unusual. Elena always made the bed, even when they hadn't spoken in 3 days. Even when she'd cried herself to sleep and he'd heard it through the wall of his study and done nothing. Even then, in the morning, the bed was made. She was precise that way. Careful. She kept things orderly on the surface no matter what was happening underneath, but the nightstand on her side was empty. Her book was gone. The small reading lamp she'd carried from apartment to apartment before they married, gone. The framed photograph of her mother that had sat in the same spot for 4 years, gone. Lucian stood very still for a moment. He walked to her closet, opened it. Most of her clothes were still there, but the things that mattered to her weren't. The worn leather jacket she'd bought secondhand in Florence the year they met. The silver jewelry box her mother left her. The small cosmetics case she took on every trip because she refused to use hotel products. The paperback she'd been reading for the last 2 weeks, bookmarks still tucked inside the last chapter. Gone. He walked back to the kitchen. Her phone was on the table. The sleek device he'd given her 2 years ago, the one connected to the Moretti network. The one he'd always assured himself was for her protection. It sat face up next to a glass of water that had been poured and not drunk. Beside the glass, her wedding ring. The 3-carat emerald-cut diamond he'd placed on her finger in a ceremony attended by 400 people, half of whom carried weapons beneath their suits. And under the ring, a folded piece of paper. He didn't touch it yet. He reached for his phone and called the head of his residential security detail. The man answered on the first ring. "Mr. Moretti? Where is she?" A pause. Just a fraction of a second, but Lucian had spent his life reading silences. That pause told him everything before the words followed. "Mrs. Moretti left the premises at approximately 5:14 this morning, sir. On foot through the South Garden exit, she had... Who cleared her to leave? No one cleared her. She has standing permission to use that exit at any... What did she take? One bag, sir. Small. Canvas shoulder bag. Did anyone follow her? The silence this time was longer. Worse. No, sir. We weren't... The protocol is for external threats. She wasn't considered... Lucian ended the call. He stood in his kitchen, surrounded by 12,000 square feet of curated silence and expensive furniture and the faint smell of the coffee that had gone cold on the credenza down the hall. He picked up the folded paper, didn't open it, just held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, which was nothing. Just paper, just ink, and yet somehow the heaviest thing in the room. He put it in his jacket pocket. Then he called Marco. Marco Bellondi had been Lucien's lead investigator for 11 years. Before that, he'd worked for Interpol, which meant he knew exactly how men like Lucian thought and operated, and he'd made the calculated decision that working for one of them paid considerably better than pursuing them. He was compact and methodical and had a face that people forgot immediately after looking at it, which was among the most useful qualities in his profession. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, and he didn't pretend emotions he didn't have. He answered on the second ring. I know, Marco said. Lucian's hand tightened on the phone. What do you know? Elena left this morning, before dawn. I caught the alert from the Southgate camera archive 20 minutes ago and was about to call you. A pause. Keys clicking somewhere in the background. She planned this, Lucian. This wasn't impulsive. The bag she took, I pulled the camera angle. She knew exactly where every lens was. She moved through 3 blind spots in sequence. Someone mapped the coverage gaps for her, or she did it herself over a long period of time. Lucian said nothing. She went to the subway. 1 block east, then 3 blocks south to the 72nd Street entrance. After that, the cameras go to MTA jurisdiction, and the angles aren't clean. She could have gone anywhere. Find her. I've already started, but I need you to understand something before we go further. Marco's voice stayed flat and professional. If she prepared this carefully, she prepared everything else too. Alternate ID, cash, possibly a prearranged contact. She's not running scared. She's executing a plan. Lucian set the phone down briefly, looked at the ring on the table, the water she'd poured and didn't drink. He picked the phone back up. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what it costs. Find her. Understood. Marco paused. The hearing is at 10. Cancel it. He didn't read her letter until that evening. He sat at his desk with the lamps off and the city throwing light against the windows from 40 stories below, and he unfolded the paper and read it through twice without stopping. She hadn't written it to wound him. That was the thing. There was no anger in it, no bitterness, no carefully crafted cruelty designed to find the gaps in his armor. Elena had never operated that way. She wasn't built for that kind of warfare. She wrote that she was leaving not because she hated him, but because she had slowly understood that staying was killing something in her that she couldn't name and couldn't afford to lose. She wrote that she'd watched him, over 4 years, build something monstrous and magnificent, and she meant both words. That she understood why the men around him followed him, feared him, shaped their entire lives around his approval. That there was something genuine in the way he moved through the world, a certainty, a directness, a complete absence of the small social performances that exhausted most people. She wrote that somewhere in the first year she had loved that about him. She wrote that somewhere in the second year that same quality had started to feel like suffocation. She wrote, "You never once asked me what I wanted. Not once. Not in 4 years. Every decision was made. Every space was defined. I had a bedroom and a kitchen and a driver and an allowance and a security detail, and none of it, not one piece of it, was mine. I was a resident of your life, Lucian, not a participant in it." He read that paragraph 3 times. She wrote that she wasn't asking him to change. She wasn't writing to wound him or demand anything. She was writing so that he would know she hadn't been taken, hadn't been threatened, hadn't been driven out by anything external. She was leaving because she chose to, and she wanted him to understand the difference. Not for his sake, but for hers. Because for 4 years her choices had been invisible, and she needed this one, at least, to be seen. She wrote that she would be safe. She wrote that she would handle the medical care for the pregnancy on her own terms. She wrote that she did not intend to disappear from his child's life, but that she needed distance, time, and control over her own circumstances before she could think about what a reasonable arrangement might look like. She ended the letter with 6 words. Please don't make this into war. He folded it carefully along the original creases and set it back on the desk and stared at the city for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and told Marco to bring every available resource to bear. The first week taught him that she was smarter than he'd acknowledged. No credit card activity, no hotel records under her name or any name he could immediately connect to her. No contact with her sister in Portland, no contact with the 2 friends from her life before the marriage who were still loosely in her orbit. She hadn't called her OB. She hadn't used any transportation account he knew about. She had, essentially, ceased to exist inside any system he could access. Marco's people found the first thread at the end of day 3. A woman matching Elena's description had purchased a bus ticket for cash at the Port Authority terminal on 42nd Street at 6:40 in the morning, more than 90 minutes after leaving the residence, which meant she'd spent that window somewhere they hadn't accounted for, possibly changing her appearance or picking something up from a prearranged location. The ticket was for Albany, but Elena hadn't stayed in Albany. Marco's contact there found no trace. She'd used Albany as a misdirection, boarded something else from a smaller station, and gone a different direction entirely. She knew we'd pull the Port Authority footage eventually, Marco said, standing in front of the investigation board that had taken over the entire second bedroom of the temporary operations apartment his team had set up. She bought the ticket to Albany to give us a direction to chase, but she wasn't going to Albany. Lucian studied the board. Photographs, transit maps, a timeline of the morning plotted in red marker. She did this herself, Lucian said. It wasn't a question. Had to. If she'd asked anyone for help, we'd have found the contact by now. Marco capped his marker. She spent months watching how we work. She knows our methods. She knows which databases we access, which contacts we use, which systems we trust. He paused carefully. She was paying attention the whole time, Lucian. While she was living with you, she was studying you. Lucian said nothing for a long moment. Keep going, he said. The problem that Lucian hadn't anticipated was that his world noticed. The Moretti family operated through a complex web of relationships built on the perception of control. Lucian's authority wasn't merely functional. It was atmospheric. Men followed him because he projected an absolute certainty that he would always be several moves ahead of every situation. That certainty was not an act. It was real. It had been forged over 2 decades of genuinely difficult decisions made in genuinely dangerous circumstances, and it had earned him a position that most men in his world could only achieve through either inheritance or blood, and usually both. But by the end of the first week, when the divorce hearing had been postponed indefinitely, and the word circulating through the lower levels of the family was that the Don's wife had left of her own accord, the atmosphere shifted, slightly, the way air pressure shifts before a storm. His consigliere, a sharp-faced man named Desmond Vale, who had served 3 Moretti heads and outlasted all of them, brought it to him directly, which was the only reason Lucian tolerated him. The Ferrano family sent their regards, Desmond said, standing across the desk in Lucian's main office, along with a request to revisit the warehouse district terms. The warehouse district terms are not up for revision. That's what I told them. Then why are you telling me? Desmond's jaw shifted. Because they sent the request through a channel they wouldn't have used 6 months ago. They're testing response time, checking to see if the machine still works the same way. Lucian looked at him. You asked me to bring you anything that felt off, Desmond said. That felt off. It is off, which is why you're going to call Adriano Ferrano personally and remind him that the warehouse district terms include a clause that requires a 12-month notice period before renegotiation requests, and that the next communication I want to receive from his family is a written apology for wasting my time. Lucian's voice hadn't changed volume or temperature, but Desmond straightened slightly anyway. Tell him I'm not distracted. Tell him I'm watching. Yes, sir. And Desmond, the man paused at the door. If I hear those terms come up again before the 12 months are up, I'll assume the Ferrano family wants a different kind of conversation. Make sure he understands what kind I mean. Desmond left. Lucian stared at the desk. The edge of Elena's letter was visible in his inside jacket pocket. He hadn't moved it. Sofia Valenti called on day 9. He almost didn't answer. Not because he was avoiding her, but because the sight of her name on his screen produced something he hadn't expected. A flat gray absence of interest that he recognized was new, because 3 months ago her name on his screen had produced something else entirely. He answered anyway. Habit, control, the same reflex that made him answer every call. "You've been impossible to reach," Sophia said. Her voice was warm and practiced, the tone of someone who had spent a long time learning how to make people feel slightly guilty for not being more available to her. "I've been managing things. I heard about the postponement," a pause that felt deliberately weighted. "I heard what happened." "What did you hear?" "That Elena left." Another pause, softer this time, engineered for sympathy. "Lucian, I want you to know that doesn't change anything between us. Whatever you need right now, I'll call you when I have time," he said, and ended the call. He sat for a moment after, the gray absence again, flat and wide and slightly disturbing in its completeness. He thought about the letter. "You never once asked me what I wanted." He thought about the last conversation he'd had with Sophia before all of this, a dinner at her apartment in the West Village, wine and ambient music, and the specific performance of intimacy that he now recognized quite clearly as exactly that, a performance. He'd participated in it willingly. He'd found it comfortable in the way that a well-designed room is comfortable, functional, aesthetically considered, ultimately empty of anything that required anything from you. He thought about Elena making the bed every morning, even when she'd been crying through the wall. He put the phone face down on the desk. Marco found the second thread on day 11. A woman answering Elena's description, 5'6", dark hair, small frame, now showing early pregnancy, had stopped at a pharmacy in a small town in Vermont called Walden. She'd paid cash for prenatal vitamins and a blood pressure cuff. The pharmacy clerk remembered her because she'd been careful and polite and had asked quiet questions about reliable local doctors, the kind of careful questions that suggested someone who needed the information but wasn't planning to stay. She hadn't stayed. By the time Marco's contact arrived in Walden, she'd already moved on, but the direction was becoming clearer. She was moving northeast. "Maine," Marco said, marking the map. Lucian stared at the line of marked points, Albany as misdirection, then Vermont, then, presumably, north and east from there. "Why Maine?" he said. "Off-season rental properties are cheap and private in October. Small coastal communities, people who don't ask questions and have seen enough of everything that a quiet, pregnant woman barely registers." Marco paused. "It's the right choice, tactically. If someone told her to go there, they knew what they were talking about. If she chose it herself—" He didn't finish the sentence. "She chose it herself," Lucian said. He was almost certain of it, and that certainty had been building for 11 days into something that lived in his chest just beneath his sternum, a slow-burning discomfort he couldn't name but couldn't ignore, like a bruise that kept receiving pressure. She had planned all of this, carefully, over months. While living in his house, eating meals across the table from him, attending the events he required her to attend and standing in the spaces he defined for her, all while quietly, methodically building her exit. She had been present and invisible at the same time, and he hadn't noticed. The most dangerous man on the East Coast had missed all of it. Documents. On the 14th day, Lucian read her letter for the 3rd time. He'd been avoiding it. He read it at 2 a.m, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched, the apartment quiet enough that he could hear the building's ventilation system running through the walls. He read it slowly this time, all the way through without stopping or looking away. "I don't think you're a bad man. I've never thought that. I've seen you be genuinely kind in the ways you know how to be kind. But kindness for you is always a decision, always deliberate, always controlled, always directed somewhere specific. You've never just overflowed. You've never just let something happen without managing it, including me. I don't want to be managed. I want to be known. Those are different things, and I don't think you understand that yet. I hope someday you do. I hope our son, because I believe he will be a son, I hope he gets to know the part of you that exists underneath all of this. I've seen it. It was there when you didn't know I was watching. It's worth finding. He set the letter down. His son. He hadn't let himself think about that word in concrete terms. The pregnancy had registered as a complication, a variable, something to be managed through the settlement. He'd framed it that way in his mind because framing things as problems to be solved was the only mechanism he had for processing them without coming undone. He picked up the glass of whiskey and held it for a long time and didn't drink it. His son. He was still sitting there when the first gray light of morning started pressing against the windows. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Marco. No words, just a pinned location on a map. A small coastal town in Maine, 230 miles north, and a single line beneath the coordinates. She's not alone. Someone else found her first. Lucian was on his feet before he'd finished reading. What? He drove north himself. No driver. No security. He left before sunrise, with Marco's coordinates loaded on his phone and the letter folded in his jacket pocket, and nothing else. The interstate gave way to smaller highways, then to the kind of two-lane roads that exist mostly in the spaces between things. Between towns, between the coast and the interior, between the version of the country that shows up on maps, and the version that simply persists without announcing itself. The trees were in full October color, the kind of overwhelming red and orange that felt almost aggressive in its beauty. He drove through it without seeing it. He was thinking about the single line Marco had sent. She's not alone. Someone else found her first. He'd called Marco back immediately, and Marco had given him the rest of it, the secondary investigation he'd been running in parallel. The one Lucian hadn't ordered but that Marco had initiated because Marco understood that the people close to powerful men often had more complex agendas than they presented. The investigation into Sofia Valenti. She'd hired her own investigators 3 weeks ago. Private firm, different from anyone the Moretti family used. She'd been tracking Elena's disappearance through her own channels, quietly. With money she'd moved carefully enough that it wasn't immediately visible. She'd found Elena 4 days before Marco did. She had traveled to Maine yesterday morning. Why? Lucien had asked. I don't have a complete picture yet, Marco had said. But the investigators she hired were also tasked with compiling a financial dossier on the Moretti estate. Assets, accounts, property holdings. The kind of information that would be useful if someone were preparing to make a claim against the family, or apply pressure to someone inside it. Lucian said nothing. She's not a victim in someone else's game, Lucian. She's running her own. The cottage was at the end of a gravel road that descended toward the water through a corridor of birch trees. The ocean was visible through the gaps, steel gray and flat and enormous, the kind of view that put everything on Earth into its correct proportion. Lucian parked at the tree line and walked the rest of the way. The cottage was small. White-clapboard, green shutters, a porch facing the water. A rental from the look of it. Impersonal in the specific way of places that belong to no one permanently. There was smoke coming from the chimney. Lights on inside, warm against the gray morning. And on the porch, sitting in a wooden chair as though she belonged there, was Sofia Valenti. She saw him coming, didn't move. Watched him walk up the gravel path with her hands folded in her lap, and her expression wearing the specific arrangement that people wear when they've prepared for a confrontation and have decided to control it by appearing calm. Lucian, she said. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps, looked at her for a long moment. How long? He said. How long what? How long have you been here? How long did you know where she was? Sophia's expression shifted slightly. The practiced calm adjusted around something underneath it. 4 days. I wanted to... What did you want? She stood. I wanted to protect you. What she's doing? Disappearing with your child, controlling the narrative? That's leverage, Lucian. She's going to use it. I was trying to understand the full picture before it was used against... Stop. His voice was quiet and very flat, and Sophia stopped. I've known you for 2 years. I've trusted your positioning and your intelligence and your understanding of how this world works, and I've allowed myself to believe that the interest you have in me is genuine. He held her gaze. It isn't, is it? Sophia said nothing. You hired investigators. You ran a financial dossier on my holdings. You found my pregnant wife in a remote cottage in Maine before I did, and you sat on that information for 4 days, and you came here yourself, and you're telling me it was to protect me. A pause. What were you actually planning to do with what you found? The silence lasted long enough to answer the question. We're done, Lucian said. Flat, final. No anger, which was worse than anger. Get off the property. Don't contact me again. If I find out you've made contact with Elena for any reason, I'll deal with it the way I deal with people who operate against the family. He stepped back from the porch. Go. Sophia left. He didn't watch her go. He stood at the foot of the porch steps for a moment, looking at the front door of the cottage. He could hear the ocean from here. Close. The sound of it was constant and indifferent, waves moving in regardless of what happened on shore, regardless of what men built, or destroyed, or lost. The front door opened. Elena stood in the doorway. She was wearing a wool sweater he'd never seen before. Her dark hair was loose. She looked pale and calm, and more rested than she had in months, and the small curve of her pregnancy was visible beneath the sweater, and she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't categorize. Not afraid, not angry, not softened. Just present, just fully, completely there in a way he realized she hadn't been for a long time, even when she was standing 3 feet away from him. She looked at the direction Sophia had gone, back at him. How much did you hear? He said. Enough, Elena said. They looked at each other across the short distance of the porch steps, and Lucian Moretti, who had never in his adult life stood in a situation without knowing exactly what to say next, had absolutely nothing. You should come inside, Kate, Elena said finally. It's cold. She turned and walked back into the cottage, leaving the door open behind her. He stood there for one more moment, the ocean behind him, the smoke from the chimney above, the open door in front, and felt something crack loose in his chest that had been calcifying for 20 years. Then he followed her inside and closed the door, and had no idea what came next. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, that terrified him more than anything in his world ever had. The cottage was smaller inside than it looked from the road. That was the first thing Lucian registered. Not the furniture, not the layout, but the scale of the space. He was used to rooms that announced themselves, ceilings that gave a man room to breathe and expand and occupy. This was something else entirely. Low ceilings, exposed beams, a wood stove in the corner pushing out dry heat that smelled like pine sap, and something else, something domestic and unfamiliar that it took him a moment to identify as soup. Actual soup, on an actual stovetop, in a pot that had been simmering long enough to fill the whole space with it. Elena moved to the kitchen without looking at him. She turned the burner down, checked something in the pot, and set the wooden spoon against the rest on the counter with a small, precise click. Lucian stood just inside the closed door. He didn't take off his coat. The silence lasted almost a full minute. Not uncomfortable, exactly. Not comfortable either. Something more specific than both. The silence of two people who know each other well enough to know that whatever comes next will cost something, and are each taking a breath before paying it. You found me faster than I expected, Elena said finally. Her back was still to him. Marco found you. I just drove. She turned then, leaning against the counter with her arms folded loosely across the curve of her stomach. Not defensive, just resting. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him on the porch, that same full, unguarded attention that he found more disorienting than anything she could have said. How long has Marco been running the search? Since the morning you left. All of it? Every resource? Yes. She nodded slowly, like she was checking something against a figure she'd already calculated. I thought I had more time. 3 more weeks, maybe. I was planning to send you something, a formal address, legal representation, a framework for... She stopped, started again. I wanted to be more settled before this conversation happened. What conversation? This one. The one where you stand in my doorway in your coat and we figure out what the rest of this looks like. He finally moved, crossing the small room and sitting in one of the 2 wooden chairs at the kitchen table. He didn't take his coat off. He set his phone face down on the table and looked at her. You planned all of it? He said. Yes. For how long? Elena was quiet for a moment. 8 months. The number landed in the room like something dropped from a height. 8 months. He replayed the last 8 months in his head and found almost nothing. Meetings, operations, the Ferrano renegotiation, the expansion into the Philadelphia corridor, 100 dinners and events and mornings in the same building with the same woman who had been, for 8 full months, building the architecture of her departure. He found fragments of Elena in those months. A quiet dinner where she'd asked him about his father, and he'd redirected the conversation. A night she'd sat on the bedroom balcony for 2 hours in the dark, and he hadn't gone to check on her. A Sunday morning where she'd been reading something at the kitchen table and looked up when he walked in, and the expression on her face had been, "What?" He hadn't stopped to read it. He'd poured coffee and opened his phone and moved on. "I missed all of it," he said. "You weren't looking." "No." He didn't say it as a defense, just as a fact. "I wasn't." Elena came away from the counter and sat down across from him at the small table. Up close, he could see the tiredness around her eyes. Not the acute tiredness of crisis, but the deep structural tiredness of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had only recently been able to set it down. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "Sophia, what was she actually planning to do?" Lucian looked at the table for a moment. "Leverage. She compiled financial information on the estate and she found you, and I think she was planning to use both, probably against me, pressure or positioning for something larger." He looked up. "She's been dealt with." Something moved across Elena's face. Not satisfaction, not fear. Something more tired than either. "She's the third person I know of who's tried to use me as a variable in something that has nothing to do with me." She said it without bitterness, just evidence. "Your world, Lucien. That's what your world does. It turns people into instruments." "I know." "Do you?" "I'm beginning to." She looked at him steadily. "That's not the same as knowing." The wood stove ticked in the corner. Outside, the ocean moved against the shore in a rhythm that had nothing to do with any of this. "I read your letter," Lucian said. "I assumed you would." "I read it 3 times. Something shifted in Elena's expression. Not softened exactly. More like a small recalibration. She hadn't expected that. "The part about being a resident," he said, "not a participant." She waited. "I've been thinking about that, I've been trying to find an argument against it. Evidence that it wasn't that way." He stopped. "I couldn't find any." Elena said nothing, but she was very still. "I don't have a defense," he said. "I'm not here to make one. I drove up here because Marco sent me a location and told me someone had found you first, and I needed to know you were all right. That's all I had when I left this morning. That was the whole thing. Make sure she's all right. And now that you know I am, now I'm sitting in your kitchen not knowing what I'm supposed to say." "You're not supposed to say anything," Elena said quietly. "That's not how this works. You can't negotiate your way through this one. You can't manage it." She looked at him carefully. "Is that what you're trying to do right now? Assess what I need to hear and deliver it?" The directness of it hit him somewhere unshielded. "Probably," he said. "Yes, probably that's what I'm doing." Elena absorbed that. "At least you know." "That doesn't make it useful." "No, but it's a start." She stood, going back to the stove, checking the soup again. Her movements were unhurried. She seemed, he realized, genuinely at home here, in this small borrowed cottage at the edge of the ocean. More at home than he'd seen her in 4 years inside 12,000 square feet of his. "Are you hungry?" she asked. The question was so ordinary that it caught him completely off guard. "Yes," he said, because it was true. That. They ate at the small table with the wood stove going and the light outside going gray-blue toward late afternoon. The soup was good, simple, vegetable-heavy, something she'd made from scratch. She'd found a farmer's market 2 towns over, she said. She went twice a week. She walked there because the rental car she'd arranged was too expensive to keep, and the walk was 40 minutes each way, and she'd found she liked it. He listened. He was doing something he was not accustomed to doing, simply listening, without structuring his response before she'd finished speaking, without organizing what she said into categories of relevant and irrelevant. He was just tracking her the way you track something that matters, and it required more effort than he'd anticipated. She told him about the town, the pharmacy where the clerk had remembered her. She'd been careful after that, she said, gone to a different one. She told him about the couple who ran the property management company and had rented her the cottage without much scrutiny because she'd paid 3 months up front in cash and had a pleasant manner. She told him about the prenatal appointment she'd scheduled at a clinic 40 miles south, under a different name, with documentation she'd prepared carefully over the previous 6 months. "You thought of everything," he said. "I had to. I knew if I left anything loose, you'd find it in 48 hours. It took us 11 days. I know, that was longer than I expected." A small pause. "I don't say that to be—" "No, I know." He set down his spoon. "It's accurate." 11 days is still very fast, Lucian. 11 days was too slow." He looked at her across the table. "You were out here, 8 months pregnant, in a borrowed cottage in Maine in October, alone, with 1 bag and cash you'd been pulling together in—" He stopped. "How were you pulling cash together without me seeing it?" Elena almost smiled. "Not quite." "Grocery budget," she said, "for 2 years. Small amounts? Nothing your accounting system flags." He stared at her. "Your household accounting flags anything over $400 in a single cash withdrawal. I never went over 250. Twice a month, sometimes 3 times. I told myself it was for the farmer's market. For 2 years. 2 years." He sat with that for a moment. The patience of it. The discipline. The complete invisibility she'd maintained while doing it, standing inside his house, inside his systems, inside the daily machinery of his world, quietly funding her own escape at $250 at a time. "You're remarkable," he said. It came out without strategy, without management. It was just true, and it came out, and Elena looked up from her bowl with an expression he didn't have a name for. "Don't," she said. "I'm not—" "Lucian." Her voice was careful. "I know what you're doing. I know what it looks like when you decide someone is impressive. You file it, you use it, you restructure your approach based on it." She looked at him directly. "I'm not an asset you need to reassess." The air went out of him slightly. "That's not what I meant. Maybe not consciously. Elena, I'm not saying you're a bad man." She set her spoon down, folded her hands on the table. "I'm saying I've watched you operate for 4 years, and I know what your instincts are. And right now I can see them running even while you're trying to turn them off. You drove up here this morning because something in you is telling you this is a situation that can be managed, that if you say the right things and make the right gestures and demonstrate the right kind of self-awareness, there's an outcome that looks like what you want." Her eyes held his. "I need you to understand that I am not a negotiation." The silence afterward was the loudest thing in the room. "What are you then?" he said finally. "The person carrying your son." She said it without drama, just fact. "And someone who decided she deserved more than what she had. That's all this is. It's not a move, it's not a gambit. I didn't leave to punish you or to leverage something out of you. I left because I was disappearing, and I needed to stop." Lucian pushed his chair back slightly from the table, looked at the far wall, a generic coastal print, a watercolor of boats in a harbor, the kind of thing that hangs in rental properties because it offends no one and means nothing to anyone. He thought about the art on his walls at home, museum pieces, curated, every one of them selected by someone he'd hired because he didn't have time to develop an opinion about what he wanted to look at. "I want to be here," he said. "When he's born. I want to be part of—" "That's not the question right now." "Then what is the question?" "Whether you understand why I left." She looked at him steadily. "Not whether you accept it. Not whether you've calculated a reasonable response to it, whether you actually understand it." He thought about the 8 months, the grocery cash, the letter he'd read 3 times, the unmade space in the closet, the bed that was always made. "I think I'm starting to," he said. "That's honest, at least. It's the best I have right now." Elena nodded slowly. Then we can talk. Later. Not tonight. I'm tired, and you've driven over 4 hours, and I don't want to have the rest of this conversation when we're both depleted. She stood, collecting the bowls. There's a motel in town, the Anchor. It's not much, but it's clean. I can write down the address. He looked up at her. You want me to leave? I want us both to sleep, and I want to choose when we talk, not have it happen because you showed up at my door. She set the bowls in the sink, ran the water, turned back. You came here because you were afraid and you wanted to fix something. I understand that. But fixing things on your timeline, in your way, by showing up when you decide, that's the pattern, Lucian. That's exactly the pattern. He stood. He picked up his phone from the table, looked at her across the small kitchen. There was something in his chest, that same cracked, loose feeling from the porch earlier, but more exposed now, more raw. I'll come back tomorrow, he said. I'll be here. We'll talk. We'll talk. He moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the latch. The letter, he said, without turning. The last line. Please don't make this into war. He paused. I'm not going to. Behind him, Elena said nothing for a moment. I know, she said finally. I can tell. He went out into the cold. Peace. The Anchor Motel was 7 minutes down the coast road, a single-story structure that had been painted blue at some point in the previous decade and was now the color of something that had given up. The vacancy sign buzzed in the parking lot. His rental car was the only vehicle there, except for a truck that looked like it hadn't moved since summer. He got a room, paid cash. The woman at the desk didn't look at him twice. He sat on the edge of the motel bed in his coat and called Marco. She's fine, he said. She's healthy. The pregnancy is on track. Good. Marco's voice was quiet, professional. And? And nothing, right now. We're talking, slowly. A pause on Marco's end. The family's going to want an update. Tell Desmond I'm handling personal matters and will be back in 3 days. If anything critical comes up, I'm reachable. And if they push? They won't push. He said it flatly. And if someone decides to test that while I'm gone, you know what to do. Yes, sir. Marco. A pause. The Sophia situation. Containment. Already handled. I've reached out to the firm she hired. They've been advised that their services are no longer needed by any party, and that continued involvement in Moretti affairs at any level would be considered an act of hostile intelligence against the family. A short silence. They understood. Good. He ended the call, set the phone on the nightstand, lay back on the bed in his coat and stared at the water-stained ceiling. 8 months, $250 at a time. He closed his eyes and saw her moving through the blind spots in the security coverage. 3 precise movements, each one landing in a gap she'd spent however long identifying. Not frantic, not running scared, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had done the work and trusted it. She had been more disciplined about leaving him than he had been about anything in years. That was the honest thing. That was the part that lived underneath the bruise in his chest and wouldn't stop pressing. He fell asleep with his coat still on. What? He was back at the cottage by 8 the next morning. Elena opened the door in the same wool sweater, holding a mug of tea, looking unsurprised to see him. She stepped back to let him in without a word. The morning was different from the previous afternoon, sharper. The light coming through the cottage windows was the particular clear light of cold coastal mornings, and it made everything in the small space more specific. Every grain in the wooden table, every shadow in the corners, every careful line of Elena's expression as she sat back down at the table and looked at him across it. You slept, she said. It was an observation, not a question. Some. He sat. He'd stopped at a gas station and bought coffee in a paper cup, and he set it on the table in front of him and didn't open it. I want to ask you something. All right? The 8 months. When did you decide? Was there a moment? Or was it gradual? Elena looked at the table, wrapped both hands around her mug. There was a moment, but it wasn't what you'd expect. Tell me. It was your birthday dinner last February. She looked up. We had 48 people in the private dining room, your capos, their partners, Desmond, the attorneys. And you made a toast. You thanked everyone for their loyalty and dedication to the family, and you named 12 people by name and said something specific about each one. Something you'd observed, something they'd done, something you valued in them. She paused. You didn't mention me. Not once. I was sitting at your right hand and you spoke for 7 minutes, and I was invisible. Another pause. And the thing was, I wasn't even hurt. Not in the moment. I just looked at the table and thought, this is what it is. This is what it will always be. And then I thought, I need to go. Lucian's jaw tightened. He remembered that dinner. He remembered the toast. He could not remember whether she was right about what he'd said. He knew she was right. Elena, I don't want an apology for that specific thing. That's not the point. She set her mug down. The point is that I realized I'd stopped expecting to be seen. I just adjusted, recalibrated around the absence of it. And that scared me more than anything else. Because I knew if I stayed long enough, I'd finish disappearing and I wouldn't even notice when it was done. He had nothing to say to that. He understood it in the particular way that a man understands something he's been avoiding, not for the first time, but for the first time without a defense mounted around it. I have to tell you something, he said. Elena waited. The divorce filing, the settlement I had prepared. He looked at the table. It was efficient. I had my attorneys design it to be fair by measurable standards, and I never thought about whether you'd had any input into what fair actually meant to you. He looked up. You didn't. You had no input. I decided what fair was and put it in front of you and expected you to sign it. Yes. That's not how you treat a person. No, Elena said. It's how you treat a problem. The words landed clean and true, and he let them. I've been thinking, he continued, about what you'd actually need. What would genuinely, not what's legally defensible, what would actually be right? He paused. I don't know the answer. I don't have a number or a framework. I think that's the first time in 20 years I've come to a conversation without a prepared position. Elena looked at him for a long time. Something in her expression was shifting, very slowly, very cautiously, not warming exactly, more like a door opening an inch to check what was on the other side. That's good, she said finally. Genuinely, that's good. It doesn't feel good. It feels like standing on nothing. I know. The corners of her mouth moved almost imperceptibly. Welcome to how I've felt for 4 years. He huffed out something that wasn't quite a laugh. She didn't quite smile, but the room was different for a moment, just a moment, some small pressure releasing. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, frowned. What is it? Lucian said. Unknown number. She picked it up and read whatever was on the screen. The small shift in her face, the frown deepening, something behind her eyes going still and wary, told him everything before she turned the screen toward him. The message was 8 words. You should ask him about the Cavallo account. Lucian looked at the message, looked at Elena. The name hit him with the specific dull force of something he'd buried that had just clawed its way back to the surface. Cavallo. He kept his face neutral. Years of practice made that automatic. But underneath the neutral face, something cold and urgent and very old was moving. What's the Cavallo account? Elena said. He looked at her across the table. She looked back at him, and he understood, with sudden total clarity, that whoever had sent that message had not done so by accident and had not done so to help either of them, and that the careful, quiet truce of the last 18 hours was about to become something else entirely, because there were things inside his world that he had locked away long before Elena ever entered it, and at least one of them had just found the door. I need to make a call, he said. Elena's eyes didn't move from his face. Lucien, give me 10 minutes. Who sent that message? I don't know yet. What's the Cavallo account? He stood. His voice, when it came, was the voice he used when there was no more time to be careful, quiet, flat, stripped of everything decorative. It's something from before you, he said. Something I thought was finished. Elena set the phone down on the table between them. It isn't finished, she said. No, Lucian said. It isn't. He was already dialing before he reached the door, and through the window he could see the gray ocean turning dark at the horizon, the way it does when weather is building from somewhere far out and moving fast. And he understood with the cold certainty that had kept him alive for 20 years that whatever was coming was not going to give him the 10 minutes he'd asked for. The call went to Marco in 4 rings. Lucian was standing on the small gravel path beside the cottage, his back to the water, facing the birch trees at the road's edge. The cold was immediate and clean out here, the kind that got into the collar and stayed. He kept his voice low and completely flat. "Cavallo," he said when Marco answered. A silence. Not the silence of someone who didn't know the word. The silence of someone who did. "Where did you hear that?" Marco said. Elena received a text. Unknown number. 8 words. "You should ask him about the Cavallo account." Another silence. Longer. "Marco, I need 10 minutes to—" "You don't have 10 minutes. Tell me what you know right now." "Lucian." Marco's voice had changed. Still professional, but something underneath it had shifted. A texture, a weight. The specific register of a man choosing how to enter a room with bad news. "I need you to be somewhere private." "I'm outside. Talk." "Not on this line." Lucian's hand tightened on the phone. "Marco, I've known you 11 years. I've trusted you with things that would end careers and end lives. If you tell me to call back on a different line right now, I'm going to interpret that as something very specific." It's not that." A breath. "It's complicated. The Cavallo account isn't— There are things about it that I don't think you know, that I'm not sure you were supposed to know." The cold moved through Lucian's jacket like it was paper. "What things?" "Who sent Elena that message?" That's the first question, because whoever did it knows that number, her new number, the one she set up out here. That number isn't in any system we've accessed. It's not in her name. She set it up in cash at a rural carrier 2 states away. Marco paused. "The only people who could have that number are people who've been running a parallel operation, something that predates our search." "Who?" "I don't know yet. But Lucian, the Cavallo account. It didn't close when you were told it closed. I found that 3 weeks ago when I was running background on the Sofia Valenti situation. I didn't bring it to you because I was still building the picture. You were sitting on it. I was building— Marco." The word was a blade. "You found something about the Cavallo account 3 weeks ago and you didn't bring it to me." The silence this time had a different quality. "Yes." Lucian said nothing for 4 full seconds. "Tell me everything, right now, from the beginning." He stood outside for 22 minutes. Inside the cottage, through the window, he could see Elena at the kitchen table. She hadn't moved. She was sitting with her hands around her mug and her eyes toward the window, and she was watching him with the careful, measuring patience of someone who had learned to read a person's body through glass. He didn't look at her while Marco talked. The Cavallo account had existed since before Elena. Before the Manhattan residence, before the legitimate architecture of holding companies and property trusts, and consulting umbrellas that Lucien had spent the previous decade building around the core of the Moretti operation. The account was the oldest financial instrument still connected to the family, a layered offshore structure that his father had built and that Lucien had inherited at 29 along with everything else, and which he had, over the following 6 years, slowly wound down and closed. Or believed he had closed. What Marco had found, while tracing the financial threads of Sofia Valenti's dossier, following the money backward through the firms she'd hired, was that the Cavallo account was not closed. It had been maintained, quietly, separately, through a series of shell instruments that existed beneath the legitimate structure, not by the Moretti family, not by anyone Lucian had authorized, by Desmond Vale, his consigliere. The man who had served 3 Moretti heads, the man who had stood in his office 4 days ago and reported the Ferrano family's overreach with the precise, loyal concern of someone who had spent his career protecting the family's interests. Desmond had been maintaining the Cavallo account for 7 years. moving money through it in amounts calibrated to stay beneath every threshold, accumulating quietly a parallel reserve that now totaled somewhere in the range of $68 million. Not stolen. Not exactly. More complex than that. The money was real family revenue, run through a structure Desmond had built below the visible architecture, shielded from Lucian's oversight by the simple fact that Lucian had trusted Desmond with the oversight. Why? Lucian said. I don't have all of it yet, Marco said, but I have enough to make an educated reading. Desmond is 71 years old. He's served this family for 38 years. He has no children, no property outside what the family provides. In 3 years, he'll be at an age where the kind of work he does becomes untenable. And in this world, people who become untenable don't retire comfortably. He was building an exit, a private one. Something no one could touch because no one knew it existed. A pause. But 3 weeks ago, something changed in the movement patterns. Money started going the other direction, out of the Cavallo structure into something else, something I haven't fully traced yet. And that's when I think it stopped being about Desmond's retirement and started being about something else. Something else, Lucian said. Someone approached him, I think. Someone with leverage or an offer large enough to redirect 38 years of loyalty. Marco's voice was careful. The timing matches something else. The Ferrano family's request about the warehouse district, the other family's testing response time, and the message to Elena this morning. Lucian was very still. Someone is coordinating this, he said. That's what I think. The Cavallo exposure, the timing of Sophia's operation, the pressure from the Ferrano side, it's too simultaneous to be coincidental. Someone is orchestrating a move against you, and they've recruited your consigliere, and they've found Elena. Marco stopped. Whoever sent her that message wasn't trying to help her, Lucian. They were separating you. They were making sure this morning you were 230 miles from your own organization, dealing with a personal crisis while they moved on the infrastructure. Lucian turned and looked at the cottage window. Elena was still there, still watching him. How long do I have? He said. I don't know. The money movement I flagged happened 5 days ago. If they're moving on a timeline, it could be now. It could be tonight. A pause. There's something else. Say it. The investigator Sophia hired, the one I told you we'd contacted and warned off. Marco's voice was careful. I ran a deeper check on the firm this morning. It's a front. 3-year-old incorporation, minimal public footprint, 2 named principals who don't fully exist. Whoever built it specifically for this operation. Sophia Valenti didn't find that firm. It found her. She was recruited as a piece of this, probably told just enough to make her feel like she was running her own play. She was a distraction. She was a delivery mechanism. She got close to you. She created a reason for Elena's disappearance to be complicated. Jealousy, personal stakes, emotional entanglement. All of it kept your attention on the personal situation while the operational situation developed underneath it. Lucian closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. He opened them. Get to New York, he said. Go directly to the operations apartment. Don't go through the residence. Don't contact Desmond. Don't use any communication channel he has access to. Take Rivera and Cho from the secondary team. People Desmond hasn't managed. Start pulling every thread you can find on the Cavallo outflows. And you? He looked at the cottage. I have something to do first, he said. Elena opened the door before he knocked. She'd seen him coming and read something in his walk that moved her from the table to the door. She stepped back to let him in. He came in and stood in the middle of the small room and looked at her, and the calculation he'd spent 20 years performing automatically. How to present information, how to frame it, what to give and what to withhold, ran its process, and then quietly, he set it down. I need to tell you something, he said, all of it. And I need you to listen before you react, because some of it is going to be difficult. Elena's face was very still. All right, he told her. Not everything. There were things that couldn't be said cleanly in one sitting, things that had decades of context wound through them. But the core of it, the Cavallo account, and Desmond, and the coordinated nature of what was happening, the fake firm that had recruited Sophia. The probability that the message to her phone was designed to separate them while someone moved on the Moretti organization from inside. He told her that whoever had sent the message to her number had access to surveillance that predated their own search, which meant she'd been found not by the Moretti investigation, but by someone running a separate operation, possibly for weeks, possibly before she'd even left New York. He watched her face as he said that last part. She went very still. "Before I left," she said. "Possibly. I don't know the timeline yet." "They were watching me before I left." She said it carefully, the way you say something you're testing for structural integrity. "While I was still in the house. I don't know, Marco is," which means they have the house. Her voice stayed level, but he could hear the specific control underneath it. The kind of control you use when what you actually want to do is a different thing entirely. "Someone has coverage inside your residence, and they've been watching for long enough to know that I was building an exit." "That's possible." "Yes." "They let me leave." Lucian said nothing. "They could have used me as leverage then," she said. "They had 8 months to use me while I was right there. But they waited. They let me go, and they tracked me, and they sent me a message this morning designed to... What? Break something between us? Distract you? Both?" "Both," he said. "I think both." Elena sat down at the table, not heavily. She didn't collapse into it. She sat down with the careful, deliberate movement of someone managing their body when their mind is running very fast in a direction that requires the body to stay functional. She pressed both palms flat on the table surface, looked at them. "I spent 8 months planning to be safe," she said. "Elena, I was so careful. I was so..." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "They were just waiting. This entire time they were just waiting and watching and letting me think I'd planned my way out, and I was just..." She stopped again. Something in her face shifted, moved through a sequence that went from the edge of panic through something colder and steadier, and arrived at a place that, when he saw it, reminded him of no one more than himself. "Tell me what they want. I don't fully know yet." "What's your best assessment?" "The Moretti organization. Not to destroy it, to take it. Someone wants the infrastructure, the relationships, the accounts, the territory, the institutional knowledge. You can't build what we've built in less than 30 years. You can take it if you have inside access, an external leverage, and the right moment of destabilization." He looked at her. "They have Desmond. They have 7 years of hidden financial architecture. They have a coordinated pressure campaign from multiple family sides. And they had you, not as a hostage, but as a variable. A way to put me somewhere complicated at a moment they chose. Do they have anything else?" He met her eyes. "Tell me," she said. "I don't know what else Desmond has given them. He's had access to everything." The room was very quiet. "Then you have to go back," Elena said. "I know. Now. Not in the morning. Now." She stood up. "If this is a coordinated move and you're the piece they've removed from the board, every hour you're up here is an hour they're operating inside your organization without you." "I know. Go." He didn't move immediately. He looked at her, the wool sweater, the controlled steadiness in her face, the flat of her palms still on the table, the curve of her pregnancy, the ocean visible through the window behind her. "I'm going to put security on this location," he said. "People I trust, not connected to Desmond." "No." Her voice was firm. "I don't want Moretti security around me. Not right now. Not when we don't know who else has been compromised." "Elena, if they know where you are..." "They already know where I am. They've known for weeks, apparently." Her eyes were direct. "If they were going to use me as a hostage, they'd have done it already. Right now I think I'm more useful to them where I am, as a weight on your conscience, not as a captive. If that changes, having 2 of your soldiers outside my door doesn't change it enough to matter." He hated that her logic was sound. "I'll arrange a private contact, someone unaffiliated, just to have eyes nearby." She considered. "Fine. 1 person, no connection to the family." "Agreed." He moved toward the door, stopped. "The message," he said. "The Cavallo account. I want you to understand something. He turned back. It's not. The Cavallo account isn't evidence of who I am now. It's evidence of what I inherited and what I thought I'd closed and what someone has been using without my knowledge. A pause. I'm not asking you to see me differently because of that. I'm asking you to know that my response to what's happening right now is not going to be the old version of me. I'm not going to. I need you to understand the difference. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Show me, she said. Words don't do it. I know. He held the door handle. I'll be in contact. Be careful, Lucien. It was the first time she'd said his name with that particular weight behind it. Not the weight of the last 4 years, not the distance or the managed politeness. Something older. Something from before it went wrong. He left. He drove south and made 3 calls in the first 40 minutes. The first was to Rivera from the secondary team, a methodical man of few words who had never worked directly under Desmond's oversight. Lucien told him to pull 2 additional people from the reserve list, no one from the main organizational chart, and set up passive observation within a half-mile of the main cottage. No contact with Elena unless she initiated. No Moretti identifiers. Civilian vehicles, civilian clothes. Rivera said, "Understood," and nothing else. The second call was to his primary attorney, a woman named Hargrove, who had represented the family for 15 years, and who Lucien trusted precisely because she had a healthy, specific fear of what happened to lawyers who betrayed their clients in his world. I need you to begin preparing a full audit of all instruments connected to the main estate, he told her. I need it done without going through my consigliere. Whatever your normal process is for something like this, run it around him. A pause. Lucien, an audit of that scope. Can you do it? Yes, it will start tonight. Anything that looks unusual, anything that doesn't match the established flow, document, and hold. Don't contact me through any channel Desmond has access to. Use the attorney-client communication protocol from the secondary retainer. Understood. The third call was the one that cost him something. He called his uncle Enzo, who was 74 years old and had not been involved in the operational side of the family for 11 years. Enzo had removed himself by choice, had built a quiet life in Pennsylvania, raised his grandchildren, stayed informed but stayed away from the machinery. He was the only living person who had known Lucien's father, and who could be guaranteed to be outside whatever was being coordinated inside the current structure. It's me, Lucien said when the old man answered. A breath. I know your voice, Lucien. I need your help. A longer pause. That's not something you've said before. No. Tell me. He told Enzo enough. Not everything. Enzo didn't need everything. He told him about Desmond, about the Cavallo account, about the coordinated nature of what was moving. He told him he needed the names of 2 or 3 people from the previous generation, people who predated the current structure, who had no relationship with Desmond, who could be trusted with a short-term operational request that needed to happen below any current visibility. Enzo was silent for a while after. Desmond, he said finally, the name coming out of him the way you push something out that tastes wrong. 38 years. I know. Your father would have... He stopped. Never mind. Yes, I have names. I have 3 people who owe this family enough that I can make a call tonight. Another pause. What do you need them to do? Watch Desmond, starting now. Every movement, every contact, wherever he goes, whoever he meets. Done. A pause. Lucien, be careful how you end this. Desmond knows things. He's kept things for 38 years, and now that the account has been exposed, he knows you'll find the rest. A man in that position makes decisions you don't want him making. I know. Move fast. I intend to. He ended the call and pushed the car to 90 on a straight, empty stretch of highway and watched the dark road unreal in the headlights and thought about Desmond standing across his desk 4 days ago, face sharp and concerned and utterly composed, telling him about the Ferrano overreach, telling him the machine still works the same way, performing loyalty with 38 years of practiced fluency. He thought about the toast at the birthday dinner. 12 people named, Elena invisible. He thought about all the ways a man can be blind inside the thing he built. He arrived in Manhattan at 11:47 at night. He didn't go to the residence. He went directly to the operations apartment in Midtown, a floor that appeared in the building's official records to belong to a mid-size import consulting firm. Marco was already there. Rivera's two additional people were in the corridor. Marco opened the door before Lucian reached it. The investigation board had been expanded. Two folding tables brought in, covered with printed documents, financial schematics, photographs. Three laptops open. The air in the room smelled like takeout containers and stale coffee, and the specific tension of people who had been working fast and finding things they didn't want to find. Lucian walked to the center of the room and looked at the board. The Cavallo account structure was mapped on the left wall. 68 million in the main reserve. Then, branching to the right from the most recent movements, a series of outflows that Marco had been tracing for the past 6 hours. "Where's it going?" Lucian said. Marco stood beside him. 3 destinations. The first is a holding structure connected to a man named Benedikt Rahl. German national, operates primarily through Vienna. He brokers organization-to-organization agreements in our world, the kind that transfer territorial rights and institutional arrangements when a family changes hands. Lucian looked at the name. The second destination is a law firm in Delaware, Shell, but a well-built one. It's the kind of structure you'd use to hold contested assets during a transition period, to park things legally while a change of control is finalized. And the third, Marco picked up a photograph from the table and handed it to him. It was a surveillance image, clearly taken at distance with a long lens. 2 men at an outdoor table at what appeared to be a restaurant or hotel terrace. One of them was Desmond Vale. The other was a man whose face Lucian recognized with a slowness that felt like cold water moving through him, not because he didn't know who it was, but because the recognition, once it landed, rearranged everything. "Adriano Ferrano," Lucian said. "Yes." He looked at the photograph for a long time. Adriano Ferrano was 43, the youngest head the Ferrano family had ever seated. He had moved into the position 2 years ago after his father's stroke and had spent those 2 years being underestimated by everyone, including Lucian. The warehouse district renegotiation request, the one Lucian had told Desmond to shut down with a reminder of the 12-month clause, hadn't been a test of response time. It had been a distraction. Same structure as everything else. Same architecture. Keep the Dawn looking at one thing while another thing moves. "When was this taken?" Lucian said. 6 weeks ago, Vienna. Marco paused. "There are 4 additional meetings I've been able to place across the last 4 months, each one in a different city, each one arranged carefully enough that they didn't surface in any of our standard monitoring." Desmond arranged the blind spots. Yes, he knew exactly which channels we watch and how to stay beneath them. Marco set another document on the table, a timeline dense with dates and locations. "The coordination goes back further than I initially thought. I'm now looking at 18 months of preparation. This wasn't an opportunistic move. They built it around a specific condition." "What condition?" Marco looked at him directly. "The divorce," he said. "They built the entire operation around the divorce. The destabilization, the pressure from rival families, the Sofia recruitment, the Cavallo exposure, all of it was timed around the assumption that your personal situation would be an acute crisis at a specific window, that you'd be distracted, off balance, emotionally compromised." Lucian felt something go entirely quiet inside him, the kind of quiet that precedes not calm, but its opposite. "They planned for the divorce," he said. "They planned for you to be human," Marco said carefully. "For there to be a moment when the machine had a gap, when the Dawn was a man instead of an institution." He paused. "Someone gave them that information, someone who knew about the state of your marriage, someone with access to the residence and the personal situation." Lucian set the photograph down on the table. "Desmond knew about the marriage," he said. "He knew about the divorce filing. I briefed him directly." "Yes." "He knew the hearing date." "Yes." "He knew Elena left." The connections were clicking into place with the terrible, inevitable speed of something that had always been true waiting to be seen. "He was in my office the morning I found out. I called him in. I told him I was managing personal matters and to hold the family's communications." He knew the moment it happened, from you, and he passed it forward. Marco's voice was steady and quiet. They've been watching for the exact moment you became a man with a problem he couldn't control, and Elena leaving was that moment. Lucian stood still in the center of the room. 38 years, Desmond had sat across from his father, had advised the succession when his father died, had helped Lucian navigate the first brutal years of leadership when every rival family was probing for weakness, and the only thing between the Moretti organization and collapse was the combined weight of institutional knowledge that Desmond carried. And for 18 months, possibly longer than he wanted to calculate right now, Desmond had been feeding that same knowledge to Adriano Ferrano. "Where is he now?" Lucian said. "Residence. I've had eyes on him since your call. Has he made contact with anyone in the last 3 hours?" "2 phone calls, numbers we haven't fully traced yet but are working on." Marco paused. "There's something else. One of Enzo's people called in 40 minutes ago. Desmond left the residence at 10:15, took his personal vehicle, drove to a parking structure in Chelsea." A pause. "He came out of the structure 12 minutes later with a briefcase he didn't go in with." Lucian looked at him. "A dead drop," Marco said. "Either receiving final instructions or receiving something they'd been holding for him. Payment, documents, travel materials. We don't know yet. He's preparing to run." "That's my read. The operation is at the stage where his usefulness ends and his liability begins. Ferrano will extract whatever Desmond has left to give, and then Desmond becomes a loose end." Marco's jaw tightened slightly. He may not fully understand that yet. Lucian looked at the board, at the Cavallo structure, at Adriano Ferrano's face in the surveillance photograph, at the 18-month timeline laid out in careful ink across the table. He thought about Elena and the small cottage at the edge of the ocean, 230 miles north, with one person watching from a half-mile away. He thought about what Enzo had said. "Move fast." "I need Desmond in a room," he said. Marco said nothing. "Not harmed, not threatened. I need him in a room where he understands, completely and without ambiguity, what his actual situation is." Lucian's voice was cold and precise, and completely without decoration. "Because right now, he thinks he has an exit. He thinks Ferrano is his exit. And I need him to understand what happens to men who become loose ends in Ferrano's world before he decides to take whatever is in that briefcase and get on a plane. If we move on him now, Ferrano will know within hours." "I know. It collapses the timeline. Whatever they're planning, they'll accelerate." "I know." "Lucian." Marco looked at him steadily. "If we take Desmond off the board tonight, we may not have enough to move against Ferrano yet. We'll be exposed. They'll know we've identified the play, they'll scatter, and we'll be holding one piece of a network that just went dark." Lucian looked at the photograph of Desmond and Adriano Ferrano at the outdoor terrace in Vienna. 2 men having lunch in the afternoon sun, relaxed, unhurried, confident in the architecture they'd built around an assumption about who Lucian Moretti was. He thought about Elena. "Show me." Words don't do it. He thought about the letter. Real strength is something else. He thought about his son, who was not yet born, who knew nothing about any of this, who would come into the world in a few weeks and would need a father who was more than what Lucian had been. He looked at Marco. "We're not taking Desmond off the board tonight," he said. Marco waited. "We're going to let him think the operation is still intact. We're going to let him believe he's invisible." Lucian picked up the photograph and looked at Adriano Ferrano's face. "And we're going to use the next 48 hours to build something airtight enough that when we move on all of it at once. Desmond, Ferrano, the Cavallo structure, the holding entities, everything simultaneously. 48 hours is, I know what 48 hours is. If they move first, then we adapt." Lucian set the photograph down. "But I'm not going to blow this operation because I'm angry. I'm not going to make a fast reactive move that solves one problem and leaves 5 others running." He looked at Marco. "I spent 20 years doing things the fast way, the brutal way. Right now I need to do it right." Marco studied him for a moment. "Okay," he said. 48 hours. Get everyone working through the night. Every outflow from Cavallo, every Ferrano connection, every piece of the holding structure. I want the complete picture before dawn. Lucian picked up his jacket. I'm going to the residence. Desmond needs to see me walk in like I don't know anything. If he's going to run, I need him to believe he has time. And if he's already gone, then we move faster. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. Marco. He turned back. The room was lit hard by the overhead fluorescents, everything on the table starkly visible. You found the Cavallo account 3 weeks ago and didn't tell me because you were still building the picture. Marco met his eyes. Yes. I'm not going to address that right now because I need you tonight, and I need you operating cleanly. A pause. But I'm going to address it. I know, Marco said. I'd expect nothing less. Lucien left. He arrived at the Manhattan residence at 12:30 in the morning. The night staff acknowledged him at the entrance. He moved through the lobby with the loose, unhurried pace of a man returning from a long drive, carrying nothing alarming, saying nothing remarkable. He took the elevator, walked the hallway, let himself into the primary office. He didn't turn on the lights. He sat in the chair behind his desk in the dark, and the city moved 43 stories below him, indifferent and mechanical. And he thought about Desmond Vale walking into a parking structure in Chelsea and coming out 12 minutes later with a briefcase. 38 years. He thought about his father and the weight of what his father had built, and the price of everything that weight had cost the people around it. He thought about Elena at 8 months pregnant, making a bed that didn't need to be made, keeping things orderly on the surface while the ground moved beneath her. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Enzo's man. Short. No punctuation. Desmond made a call. 11 minutes. Traced to a Vienna exchange. And then, 30 seconds later, a second message from Rivera, up in Maine. Movement at the cottage. Unknown vehicle parked at the road junction. Engine running. Been there 40 minutes. Lucien looked at the second message for a long time. He called Rivera. How many in the vehicle? 2. Can't get a clean visual on faces. Dark sedan, no plates visible from my angle. Elena. Lights on inside, no movement I can see. She's there. He stood up from the desk. Do not approach the vehicle, he said. Do not let them know you're there. But if anyone moves toward that cottage, you move first. His voice was absolutely flat. No hesitation. You understand? Yes, sir. Call me the second anything changes. He stood in the dark office with the city below and the phone in his hand and understood, with the complete cold clarity of a man who has run out of controlled options, that the 48 hours he'd given himself had just become something else entirely. Because Adriano Ferrano had just told him, through the simple act of parking a dark sedan at the end of a gravel road in Maine, that the one variable in this entire operation that Lucien could not afford to lose was the one variable Ferrano had known about all along. The ground was gone. Whatever came next would have to be built in the air. He was moving before he'd made the decision to move. That was the thing about 20 years of operating in high-stakes situations. The body learned to go before the mind finished the argument. He was already out of the office chair and pulling his jacket on and calculating distance and time before the conscious part of him had fully processed what Rivera's message meant. 2 hours and 40 minutes to Maine. He couldn't get there in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Not from Midtown, not at this hour, not by road. He called Marco while walking to the elevator. I need a helicopter. Private, no family markings. Closest available landing point to the main location. Marco didn't ask questions. Give me 4 minutes. You have 2. He took the elevator to the basement parking level. His own vehicle was there. The black Mercedes. No driver. The way he'd left it 3 days ago before all of this started. He got in, started the engine, kept the phone pressed to his ear with his shoulder while he pulled out. There's a private airfield 20 minutes south of your location, Marco said, back in 90 seconds. Westchester. I have a contact there. Reyes, former military, does private transport for the family occasionally. He can be in the air in 30 minutes. Landing zone near the cottage. Closest clear ground is a field about a mile east along the coast road. Call him now. Tell him I'll be at the airfield in 22 minutes, and I need to be in the air immediately. Done. A pause. Lucien, what's happening up there? A dark sedan parked at the road junction. 2 occupants. Engine running for 40 minutes. The silence on Marco's end was specific and brief. Ferrano moved the timeline, Marco said. Yes. They know we found the Cavallo account. Or they're not waiting to find out. Either way, they're already there. He pushed the car onto the street, heading north toward the bridge. Get me Desmond's location. He's still at the residence. My eyes confirm he hasn't left since the Chelsea drop. Keep eyes on him. If he moves, I want to know immediately. If he makes any contact, I want the recipient identified. Rivera's still watching the cottage? Yes. 2 people, engine running, no movement yet. He ran a yellow light, the intersection empty at this hour. They're waiting for something. Instruction, confirmation, a window. They haven't moved yet. What are they waiting for? Lucian thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Desmond. They're waiting for Desmond to confirm that I'm neutralized, that I'm still here in New York managing the operational crisis, not coming north. He merged onto the highway ramp, pushing the car hard, which means as long as Desmond doesn't know I'm gone, they wait. And when Desmond finds out, they move, which is why I need to be on the ground up there before that happens. He hit the accelerator. The city fell behind him, lights smearing in the side mirrors. Marco, the Ferrano operation. How far along is the documentation? We have enough for a significant civil asset case. Criminal would take another, can you move on it tonight? Not the criminal case, the financial instruments, the Cavallo outflows, the holding entities, the Delaware structure. Can you freeze them? Hargrove would need to file for, call her now, wake her up, tell her I need emergency injunctions on every instrument connected to the Cavallo outflows. Every single one. I want those accounts locked before morning regardless of what happens up here. He was doing 90, the highway clear and dark ahead of him. If Ferrano takes the organization and gets the Cavallo reserve, he has the capital to make it permanent. If we freeze the money, he has a hostile territory and no liquidity to hold it. If we file emergency injunctions, every party connected to those instruments will know within hours. I know, do it anyway. It collapses the covert operation entirely. The covert operation is already collapsed. Ferrano put 2 men outside my pregnant wife's door. We're not being subtle anymore. His voice was flat and absolutely certain. Call Hargrove, move on the accounts, and get Rivera on the line. I want him on standby for my instructions the moment I'm in the air. He made it to the Westchester airfield in 19 minutes. Yes. The helicopter was a dark blue 6-seater with the rotors already moving when he pulled into the field. The pilot, Reyes, was a compact man in his late 40s with a military posture and the specific economy of movement that came from years of operating in high-pressure situations. He said nothing when Lucien climbed in, just lifted off the moment the door was secured and banked north into the dark. Lucien put on the headset. 48 minutes, Reyes said through the comm. Maybe 45 with this wind. Make it 40. I'll try. The city fell away beneath them, its lights contracting to a grid and then to a smear and then to a glow at the horizon. Above and ahead, the sky was dark and completely clear, stars sharp in a way they never were from street level. The ocean appeared as they crossed the Connecticut coastline, a massive black absence with a faint phosphorescent line at the shore, the waves just barely visible from this altitude. Lucien called Rivera. Status. Vehicle is still at the junction. No movement. I've repositioned. I have a better visual angle now. Both occupants are in the front seats. They haven't gotten out. There's been 1 phone call from inside the vehicle, about 10 minutes ago. Short. Who to? Unknown. Working on it. Elena. Light is still on inside. I can see her silhouette moving occasionally. She's awake. He thought about Elena awake in the small cottage at 1 in the morning, whether she'd seen the vehicle, whether she'd understood what it meant if she had. Rivera, in approximately 35 minutes, I'm going to be on the ground a mile east of your position. When I call you from the landing zone, I need a full situation report. Locations, any changes, condition of the road between the field and the cottage. Yes, sir. If anything changes before then, you'll have it immediately. He ended the call and looked out the window at the dark water below and tried to think cleanly. The 2 men in the vehicle were Ferrano's people. sent not to act but to observe, to confirm that Elena was there and that the situation was stable until the right moment. That moment was defined by whatever signal Desmond was supposed to send, confirmation that Lucian was in New York and engaged with the organizational crisis and would not be going north. That signal hadn't come yet, which meant the window was still open, but the window was closing. He looked at his watch. 1:18 in the morning. He called Marco. Desmond? Still at the residence. He's in the library, but my guy can see him through the window. He's got a drink and he hasn't moved in 20 minutes. He's waiting for Ferrano's people to check in. That's my read, too. How long before Hargrove can file the injunctions? She called me back 10 minutes ago. She's preparing the filings now. She said the earliest she can submit is 5 in the morning when the emergency financial court channel opens. Nearly 4 hours. Tell her to have everything ready to submit the moment that window opens, not a minute after. Done. A pause. Lucian, once those injunctions land, Ferrano's people will know within an hour, whoever is monitoring those accounts, and they will have someone monitoring, will trigger an alert the moment the freeze attempt hits. I know. That means whatever happens up there, you have until approximately 6 in the morning before Ferrano knows the financial operation is compromised. If his people in Maine haven't gotten a go signal by then, they may act independently. Then I have 4 hours to resolve the main situation before the financial move triggers the rest of it. Yes. Can you reach Adriano Ferrano directly? A pause. I have a contact number. Indirect. Goes through a layer. But it reaches him. In 2 hours, I want you to use it. Tell him I want a direct conversation. Not his lawyers, not intermediaries. Him and me. Lucian watched the coastline below the helicopter. Tell him I've found everything. Tell him the accounts are being moved against. And tell him that what happens to Desmond, and what I choose to do with everything I have on him personally, depends entirely on whether he's willing to have a conversation before 5 in the morning. You want to negotiate with him. I want him on the phone and thinking about his options when I'm already on the ground up there and his people don't know it yet. He paused. Fear works best when the thing being feared is already in the room. Reyes put the helicopter down in a coastal field 41 minutes after takeoff, the landing smooth and fast in the way of someone who'd done it in worse conditions. The field was dark and flat, the ocean 200 yards west, the smell of salt and cut grass coming in when Lucian pushed the door open. Stay with the aircraft, he told Reyes. How long? I don't know. Stay. He was moving through the dark field before the rotors finished cycling down, his phone in his hand, the coordinates loaded. The coast road was visible ahead, a pale line between the trees and the water. He moved along it, keeping to the edge, using the tree line as cover, his footsteps quiet on the grass. He called Rivera. I'm on the ground, east field, coming toward the road. Copy. Vehicle is still at the junction. No change. I'm 200 meters north of your line of approach, behind the stone wall. Any communication from inside the vehicle in the last 30 minutes? One more call. Short again. Whoever they're reporting to is getting impatient. Because Desmond hasn't sent the confirmation. That's my guess. He reached the road and crossed it fast into the trees on the western side. The cottage was 300 meters south along the gravel path. He could see through the trees the faint warm light of the cottage windows. And 100 meters ahead of him, barely visible in the dark, the sedan. Dark. Engine off now. That was new. He stopped. Engine off was different from engine running. Engine running meant waiting. Engine off meant something had changed. He called Rivera. The engine's off, he said quietly. I see it. Just happened. About 3 minutes ago. Did they get a signal? I don't know. No visible phone activity since the last call. Lucian looked at the sedan for a long moment. Both silhouettes still in the front seats. Not moving. But the engine was off. I'm going to approach from the east side of the gravel path, he said. Come in behind the vehicle. If either door opens, you move from the north. Understood. Don't engage unless they move toward the cottage. Copy. He moved through the trees, keeping low, moving parallel to the gravel path. The cottage light was ahead of him. He was close enough now to see the smoke still coming from the chimney, thin and gray in the darkness, barely visible. He was 30 meters from the sedan when the passenger door opened. The man who got out was large, moving quietly for his size, wearing dark clothes. He didn't look toward the trees. He looked toward the cottage. His right hand was at his side, occupied. Lucian stopped moving. He looked at the man's right hand. He called Rivera. One word. Now. What happened in the next 40 seconds was controlled and fast and not loud. Rivera came from the north, a direct line from behind the stone wall, already at a run. The second person from Rivera's team came from the east, cutting off the driver's door before it fully opened. Lucian came out of the trees at the passenger side. The large man turned and saw Lucian coming and made a decision, the wrong one. He brought the weapon up, and Lucian was already inside the arc of it, his forearm driving the weapon hand outward, his body weight going into the man's center, and they went into the side of the sedan together with a sound like a dropped engine block. The man was strong and trained, and he fought for it, and Lucian fought harder, and it lasted approximately 7 seconds before Rivera was there. The driver didn't get out of the car. Rivera's second person had the door and had made the situation clear. Lucian stepped back. His shoulder was burning where it had taken the edge of the sedan door. He was breathing hard. Not hard like fear, hard like effort, like something physical that demanded all of it. He looked at the large man now against the side of the vehicle with Rivera behind him. "Who sent you?" Lucian said. The man said nothing. "I know who sent you. I have everything on Ferrano. Accounts, meetings, documentation going back 18 months. You're not protecting anything by staying quiet." He looked at the man steadily. "I'm asking as a professional courtesy. Tell me what the instruction was tonight. What were you waiting for?" The man's jaw was tight. He was somewhere between stubborn and calculating, running the math on whether loyalty to Ferrano was still the right bet. "We were told to hold," the man said finally. His accent was faint, mid-Atlantic, practiced. "Wait for confirmation that the target was secure in New York. Then move." "Move how?" "Escort, not harm." A pause. "Take the woman somewhere accessible." "Accessible to who?" "Ferrano. He wanted her as he called it insurance, in case the financial operation got exposed before it was complete." Lucian breathed out through his nose. Insurance. Elena, 8 months pregnant, as insurance. "Is there a third team?" he said. The man hesitated. "Is there a third team?" Lucian said again. His voice had dropped a register, and the man heard what was in it. "There's a backup, 2 more, stationed farther up the coast road, in case the first team was compromised." Lucian looked at Rivera. Rivera was already on his phone. "Go," Lucian said. Rivera moved, pulling the large man with him, speaking quietly into the phone as he went. Lucian stood beside the sedan and breathed and felt his shoulder and looked at the cottage. The light was still on. He walked up the gravel path. Elena opened the door before he knocked. Again. She was getting better at reading him at a distance. She looked at him. His face, his shoulder, his general state of having just come through something physical in the dark, and her expression moved through several things quickly and settled on controlled. "Come in," she said. He came in. She closed the door. He stood in the middle of the room, and she looked at him with her arms folded and waited. "There were 2 of them," he said, "in a sedan at the junction. Ferrano's people. Rivera has them. There's a backup team up the coast. Rivera is handling it." Elena's face was very still. "They were going to take you," he said, "as leverage, to use against me if the financial operation got exposed." She absorbed that. He could see her doing it, not shutting it down, not performing calm, but actually processing it in the specific way Elena processed things, which was thorough and deliberate and slightly terrifying in its completeness. "How long have they been there?" she said. "We first saw them about 2 hours ago, but they may have had eyes on this location longer." "The vehicle that drove past twice yesterday," she said. Lucian looked at her. "Yesterday afternoon, a sedan. It slowed at the road junction both times. I noticed it and didn't know what to make of it, so I made note and watched the road afterward." Her voice was steady. "I should have called you." "You didn't have—" "I should have called you," she said again, and the repetition was not self-criticism. It was factual. She'd made a judgment call, and she was owning the result of it. What happens now? I have someone reaching out to Ferrano directly to open a line before the financial freeze hits in the morning. He looked at her. After that, everything accelerates. The accounts lock, he knows we know, and it either becomes a negotiation or it becomes a war. He paused. I'd like it to be a negotiation. Elena looked at him for a long moment. You drove up here last night, she said, and now you flew up tonight. Yes. Because of me. Yes. She unfolded her arms, set them at her sides. There was something moving in her expression that he couldn't fully read. Too many things at once, layered in the way that Elena layered things. Sit down, she said. You're favoring your right shoulder and you've been awake for 20 hours. Sit down. He sat at the kitchen table. She went to the cabinet and found the small first aid kit that rental properties always had somewhere and came back with it and sat beside him. She helped him out of his jacket. He let her, which was itself something new, and assessed the shoulder with careful hands, pressing gently along the joint until she found where it was wrong, and he made an involuntary sound. Not dislocated, she said, bruised, probably hit something hard. The car door. She found an ice pack in the kit and cracked it and pressed it against the joint and held it there. Her hands were steady. His were too. But the steadiness in his was trained, and the steadiness in hers was something else, something that came from a deeper place. Elena, he said, don't. I need to say something. You need to rest your shoulder and let the ice work. Elena. She looked at him. I should have been looking, he said, at the birthday dinner, at all of it. I should have been paying attention. The words came out without architecture, without the managed precision he used for everything else. Just flat and direct and inadequate the way true things often are. I was building something and I convinced myself that the building was the point, that if the structure was strong enough, everything inside it would be fine, including you. He stopped. I was wrong. I know that now in a way I didn't know it before, and I'm not saying it to get something from you. I'm saying it because it's true and because you deserve to hear it said plainly. The ice pack made a soft sound against his shoulder. Elena was looking at the table. I know, she said finally, quietly. I know you believe that right now. It's not belief, it's Lucian. She looked up. Her eyes were steady and direct and exhausted and very clear. I'm not the measuring stick for whether you've changed. That's not my job. That was never my job. She held his gaze. You becoming a better man, that's yours to do. With or without me. For yourself and for your son. She paused. I'm glad you flew up here tonight. I'm genuinely glad. But I need you to understand that this, she gestured between them, is not solved because you showed up when it mattered. Because you should have been showing up for 4 years. Showing up once when it's a crisis is different from being present when it isn't. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. So we'll see, she said. Not unkindly, just honestly. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Marco. He answered. Ferrano took the call, Marco said without preamble. He's on a line. He wants to talk. Lucian looked at Elena across the small table. Put him through, he said. A click. Static. Then a voice. Younger than you'd expect for what it represented, clipped and careful and not quite as controlled as it wanted to be. Moretti, Adriano Ferrano said. Ferrano. Lucian's voice was completely level. You put 2 men outside my wife's door tonight. A pause. You weren't supposed to be in Maine. No, I wasn't. Lucian kept his eyes on Elena's face. She was watching him, still holding the ice pack against his shoulder, her hand steady. Your people are with my people now, the backup team too. They're fine. I'm not running that kind of operation tonight, but they're not available to you anymore. Silence on the line. You've been building this for 18 months, Lucian said. I know about Desmond. I know about Vienna. I know about the Cavallo outflows and the Rawl connection and the Delaware holding structure. He paused. In 3 hours and 40 minutes, those accounts get frozen. Everything you've built financially goes into legal suspension and stays there until courts resolve it, which in my experience takes between 18 months and 4 years, during which time the Ferrano family operates without the capital reserve you were counting on to hold what you were planning to take. The silence on Ferrano's end was a different quality now. Working silence. "What do you want?" Ferrano said. "I want a conversation, face to face. You and me. Somewhere neutral." Lucian picked up the ice pack himself, holding it in place. "In the morning, before 5. "You're in Maine." "I have a helicopter." Another pause. Longer. "Why a conversation instead of—" "Because destroying you doesn't get me anything I actually want right now," Lucian said. "And because I'm trying something different." He looked at Elena. "What you built over 18 months, the intelligence operation, the financial architecture, the coordination, that's not nothing. You're smarter than your father. You're more patient." A pause. "And you made one miscalculation." "What miscalculation?" "You planned for me to be distracted by my personal life. You planned for the divorce to compromise me. You designed the entire operation around a version of me that would be diminished by what was happening at home." He let that sit for a moment. "The version of me you planned against isn't the version you're dealing with tonight." The line was very quiet. 6 o'clock, Ferrano said finally. "The Meridian building in Boston. I have a floor there." "I'll be there at 6. He ended the call. Elena was looking at him. "You're going to negotiate with him," she said. "I'm going to give him a way out that doesn't require me to spend the next 2 years in a war." He looked at her steadily. "Wars are expensive. They cost things I can't afford to lose right now." Something moved across her face. Not softened, that wasn't the right word. Something more specific. Recognition, maybe, of something she hadn't expected to see. "Go," she said. "Go and end this." He stood, picked up his jacket, winced at the shoulder. "Rivera and his team will stay until I'm back," he said. "And the backup teams are neutralized. I'm fine," she said. "Go." He moved to the door. "Lucian." He turned. She was standing in the middle of the small kitchen, the ice pack still in her hand, the wool sweater and the curve of her pregnancy and the cottage light warm around her. "Be careful. Not because I need you to be. Because your son does." The words hit him in the chest in the specific way that only true things can. "I will be," he said. He went out into the dark and walked fast toward the field where Reyes was waiting, the ocean moving in the dark to his left, cold and enormous and absolutely indifferent to the small human machinery of betrayal and consequence and whatever fragile thing was trying to survive inside it. And he breathed the salt air in and let his mind go absolutely clear. The way it always went clear when everything was on the line, and there was only the next move and the move after that, and the thing at the end of it that he was finally, for the first time in 20 years, fighting for something real enough to deserve it. He climbed into the helicopter. "Boston," he told Reyes. "Meridian building. You know it?" "I can find it." "Then go." The rotors built to full pitch, and the dark field fell away beneath them. And ahead of them the black coastline curved south toward the city where Adriano Ferrano was already on his phone, and Desmond Vale was already calculating his options, and the accounts were 4 hours from freezing, and the whole architecture of 18 months of careful betrayal was about to sit across a table from the man it had been built around and find out what he'd become. The Meridian building in Boston stood 40 stories above the financial district, all glass and cold geometry, the kind of architecture that announced its own seriousness. At 5:58 in the morning, it was mostly dark. Lobby lights, a few scattered floors lit from inside, the pre-dawn sky pressing down gray and low from the east. Lucian came through the lobby alone. No Marco. No Rivera. No security. No backup. No one in an earpiece watching a feed somewhere. He'd made that decision in the helicopter over the dark coastline, somewhere around Providence, when Reyes had asked if he needed anything arranged at the landing zone, and Lucien had said no. He'd thought about it for another 10 minutes and confirmed the decision. He was walking into Adriano Ferrano's building in the gray hour before dawn with a bruised shoulder and no sleep and nothing in his hands, and if that read as weakness to the people in that room, then it read as weakness, and he was willing to carry that. He took the elevator to the 38th floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that had been designed to communicate power through restraint, pale stone floors, low lighting, a long desk with no one behind it. A man in a dark suit was waiting. Not armed, visibly. But the way he held himself suggested familiarity with being armed. He looked at Lucian once and said nothing, and moved toward a set of double doors. Lucian followed. The room beyond was a conference space. Long table, 12 chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows facing east toward the harbor. The sky over the water was the specific color of the hour before sunrise, something between charcoal and blue, the horizon barely distinguishable from the water. Adriano Ferrano was standing at the window. He was younger than he photographed. That was always the thing about people you knew through surveillance. Photographs flattened them into a fixed version of themselves, stripped them of the specific animation of being alive. In person, Ferrano was lean and contained and carried the particular kind of tension that lived in people who had spent their whole lives in a high-stakes world, but had not yet fully absorbed the cost of it. He was somewhere in his early 40s, dark hair, dark eyes, a suit that had been put on carefully even at this hour, which told Lucian something about how the man used control. He turned when Lucian came in. His eyes moved over him. The bruised shoulder, the absence of security, the general condition of a man who had been moving through the night without rest. And whatever he found in that assessment, he kept behind his expression. "Moretti," he said. "Ferrano." Lucian came into the room but didn't sit. Stood on the opposite side of the long table, facing him across it. "Your people in Maine." "I've been informed. They're intact?" "Yes." "I told you. Not that kind of operation." Ferrano nodded slowly. "Sit." "I'm fine standing." A pause. Ferrano moved away from the window and sat at the table himself. Not at the head, Lucian noticed. In the middle, on the long side. A choice that leveled the geometry of the room slightly. Deliberate, probably. The man thought in terms of signal and symbol the way Lucian did. "You have the Cavallo documentation," Ferrano said. "Yes." "And Desmond?" "He's being managed. He's not your problem right now." Ferrano looked at him steadily. "Then what is my problem right now?" Lucian pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. He set his phone on the table, face up. The time read 5:59. "In 61 minutes, the accounts freeze," he said. "All of the Cavallo outflows, the holding entities, the raw instruments, the Delaware structure. Everything goes into legal suspension and stays there until the courts sort it out, which you know as well as I do could take years." He looked at Ferrano directly. "That's what happens if we leave the room this morning without something different." Ferrano's jaw was very still. "And what's the alternative?" "Tell me what you actually want." The question landed in the room and sat there. Ferrano looked at him with an expression that was trying to categorize what it was seeing and not quite managing. "What I want. Not what you planned, not the operation, what you actually want. For your family, for your position, for whatever drove you to spend 18 months building something this complex." Lucian kept his voice level. "Because men don't spend 18 months on something this careful unless the thing underneath it is real." A silence. Ferrano leaned back slightly in his chair. His hands were on the table, still. "The warehouse district," he said. Lucian waited. "My father negotiated the original terms with your father, 32 years ago. The terms were built around a dynamic that no longer exists. The Ferrano family as junior partner in a corridor that we've developed and held and maintained for 3 decades, while the Moretti share of revenue from that corridor has consistently exceeded what the original partition justified." He looked at Lucian. "I asked for renegotiation through your consigliere who, as you now know, was feeding information in both directions, and you shut it down without a conversation." "I shut down a request that came through an improper channel on an artificial timeline. You shut it down the way your father used to shut things down, with a reminder of legal clauses and an implied threat." Ferrano's voice was controlled, but not without heat. "I'm not my father, and the Ferrano family isn't what it was when your father set those terms." Lucian looked at the table for a moment. He thought about Desmond in his office 4 days ago. Their testing response time. checking to see if the machine still works the same way. And Lucian had told him to shut it down harder, to send a message, to remind the Ferrano family of their position. "You're right," Lucian said. Ferrano stopped. "The way I handled the renegotiation request was wrong, not legally. The clause exists and it was correctly cited, but it was the wrong response to what was actually being asked." Lucian met his eyes. "You wanted a conversation. I sent a reminder. That's the kind of leadership that drives people to spend 18 months building a case for why the current arrangement is untenable." The room was very quiet. Ferrano was looking at him with an expression that had shifted, something older and more wary moving underneath the controlled surface. He'd come into this room expecting a certain kind of Moretti. He was recalibrating in real time, and the recalibration was costing him something because it meant his model had been wrong. And when your model is wrong, you have to go back to the raw data. And that's always more expensive than working from a map. "What are you offering?" Ferrano said carefully. "A renegotiation, real one, within 60 days. The warehouse district terms reviewed from the ground up with current revenue data and current operational contribution on both sides." Lucian's voice was direct. "If the numbers justify a different partition, we change the partition. If they don't, we build something else that addresses what the Ferrano family actually needs from that corridor." Ferrano said nothing. "In exchange," Lucian set his hands flat on the table, "you pull back from the Cavallo position entirely. Any instruments connected to your capital in that structure get unwound. The raw connection ends. The Delaware holding entity dissolves." He paused. "And you tell me everything Desmond gave you. Every piece of information, every organizational detail, every vulnerability he identified. All of it." Ferrano's eyes narrowed slightly. "Not to use against you," Lucian said, "to know what's been compromised, so I can rebuild what needs rebuilding without leaving gaps that someone else uses next time." A long silence. "You're trusting me to tell you the truth about what I have," Ferrano said. "No, I'm offering you a deal that's significantly better than the alternative, and then I'm going to verify everything you tell me independently, but I need the starting point from you." Ferrano looked at the table. His fingers moved slightly. Not a gesture, just the small physical expression of a mind working through something large. He was, Lucian recognized, genuinely thinking. Not performing calculation, actually sitting with the unexpected shape of the thing in front of him. "Desmond gave us organizational maps," Ferrano said. "Account structures. Operational protocols. The secondary team assignments, who reports to whom outside the visible hierarchy. Communication frequencies." He paused. "He gave us access to 3 months of internal correspondence through a channel he controlled, and he gave us the timeline of your divorce proceedings, every step, every date, the settlement structure. Who else on my current team is compromised? No one else directly. Desmond was the instrument. He didn't recruit inside your organization. He didn't want the risk. He operated alone. You're certain?" "As certain as I can, be. He was very clear that he was the only access point. It was his value proposition. He kept it exclusive to keep himself irreplaceable." Lucian absorbed that. It tracked with what he knew of Desmond. The man's entire architecture had been built on being the singular repository of indispensable knowledge. He wouldn't have shared access. He'd have guarded it like the only currency he had. "The Sofia Valenti operation," Lucian said. "My people found her. She wasn't hard to find. She'd been building a position close to you for 2 years, she had her own motivations, and when we approached her through a managed intermediary, she responded to the framing we offered." Ferrano's voice was precise. "She thought she was helping build leverage that would benefit her. She didn't know the full scope. She was a delivery mechanism." "Yes." "She's been dealt with," Lucian said. "Not as a threat, just as information." Ferrano nodded. "The people in Maine tonight," Lucian said. "The instruction was to take Elena as insurance." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Ferrano's expression. Not guilt, exactly. Men in his world didn't traffic in guilt, or learned early not to. But something adjacent to it, discomfort with the specific thing named. "Yes," he said. "She's 8 months pregnant." "I know." I need you to understand something. Lucian's voice had not changed volume or temperature, but Ferrano became very still. Whatever we agree to in this room this morning, whatever the terms are, whatever the renegotiation looks like, that instruction is the line. The moment you decided to use a pregnant woman as a pressure instrument, you used something up. You understand what I mean? Yes, Ferrano said quietly. I understand. Good. Lucian looked at his phone. 6:14. We have 46 minutes. They talked for 38 of them. It was not a warm conversation. It was not a conversation between men who trusted each other or had any reason to. It was a conversation between two people who were each holding the other's exposure and choosing, for specific calculated reasons, to put it down, not out of goodwill, but out of the recognition that the alternative cost more than either of them was willing to pay. By 6:47, they had the outline of a framework. The Cavallo instruments would be unwound over a 30-day period, with Lucian's attorneys managing the process and Ferrano's withdrawing from the structure cleanly. The financial freeze would not be filed. Lucian called Hargrove at 6:50 and told her to hold. The warehouse district renegotiation would begin within 60 days, conducted by designated representatives from both families with current revenue data, and whatever terms emerged would be documented and binding. Desmond was not part of the framework. They didn't discuss what happened to Desmond. Some things were understood without being said, and in the particular language of the world both men inhabited, the absence of Desmond from a negotiated settlement was its own complete sentence. At 6:52, Ferrano extended his hand across the table. Lucian looked at it for a moment. He shook it. I want you to know something, Ferrano said. His voice had a different quality now, pushed in, quieter, less managed, something closer to what he actually sounded like maybe, when the performance of position was set down. My father described Lucian Moretti's father to me as a man who never learned that the world changes, who held his position through inertia and fear until the inertia ran out. He looked at Lucian. I spent 18 months assuming you were the same. I was, Lucian said, until recently. Ferrano looked at him. Things change, Lucian said. Sometimes the change costs everything. He picked up his phone from the table. Let's hope we're both different enough from our fathers to make this work. He left the room. He flew back north. He hadn't planned to. He told Reyes to be ready for a New York departure after the meeting, and he'd called Marco from the lobby of the Meridian building with the framework outlined, and Marco had started the containment work immediately, and there was a full day's worth of operational reconstruction waiting in Manhattan. The Desmond situation, the organizational audit, the documentation that needed to be built around everything Ferrano had disclosed. But he told Reyes to go north. He didn't fully examine the decision. He just made it. The cottage appeared below them an hour later, the coast road and the birch trees and the pale clapboard and the smoke from the chimney already going, which meant Elena was awake, which she would be because Elena woke early and he was learning, slowly, to hold the specific details of her like they mattered. Rivera's team cleared out as Lucian walked up the gravel path. They were professionals and said nothing. He nodded at Rivera as they passed, and Rivera nodded back, and that was the complete transaction. He knocked this time. Elena opened the door. She was in the wool sweater again, holding a mug of tea, and she looked at him with the particular expression she'd worn each time he'd appeared at this door. Not surprised, exactly, but recalibrating, each time finding something slightly different in what she saw. You came back, she said. I said I would. She stepped back and let him in. The cottage was warm. Morning light was coming through the east window now, the first real light of the day, and it hit the wooden table and the grain in it and made the small room look almost beautiful in its simplicity. He sat down. She poured him a cup of tea without asking, because the coffee in the gas station cup from the night before had been the last of it. And there was no coffee here, and she set it in front of him and sat across from him. How did it go? She said. He told her. All of it. The room, the conversation, the framework, the handshake. He told her about the warehouse district and Ferrano's legitimate grievance and the way an improper shutdown of a real problem had driven 18 months of something that could have been resolved in an afternoon if he'd been the kind of man who listened instead of managed. Elena listened. She didn't interrupt. She held her mug in both hands and she tracked every word, and when he was done, she sat with it for a moment. He had a point, she said, about the renegotiation. Yes. You know that. I know it now. He looked at the table. I've been running the same calculation for 20 years. Someone pushes. Push back harder. Someone asks for something. Determine what they're actually trying to take. Every request read as an opening move in an adversarial game. He stopped. I forgot that sometimes people are just asking for what they need. Elena was quiet. You asked me to stop managing and start listening, he said. I've been trying to practice that. I'm not good at it yet. No, she said. You're not. He almost smiled. That's honest. I've been practicing honesty too, she said. For 8 months in the other direction, getting better at saying what I actually think instead of managing around it. She looked at him over the rim of her mug. We're both learning. Something settled slightly in the room between them. Not resolved. Not healed. That wasn't the right word, and she would have caught it immediately if he'd used it. But something had shifted from the acute register into something quieter, something that could exist in the same space as a cup of tea and morning light through a window. Desmond, Elena said. Yes. What happens to him? Lucian looked at his hands. He's 71 years old. He served this family for 38 years. He built something hidden and secret because he was afraid of what happens to people in his position when they're no longer useful. He paused. He was right to be afraid. People in his position don't get comfortable exits, not in my world. But, he looked up. There's a but, she said. He gave Ferrano information that could have gotten you killed, could have gotten our son, could have put both of you in a position where the outcome was out of my hands. He stopped. I'm trying to figure out how to separate the part of me that knows what Desmond deserves from the part of me that's deciding what kind of man I'm going to be. Elena set her mug down. What did you decide? She said. That I'm not going to destroy him. The words came out slowly, each one chosen. He's going to face what he built, the financial exposure, the legal consequences of the account structure. He'll lose everything he accumulated through the Cavallo instruments. He'll lose his position. He'll lose the protection of the family name. He paused. But I'm not going to do the other thing. Even though he gave them a way to get to you, I'm not going to do it. Elena looked at him for a long time. Because of what you said, he said. In the letter. About the part of me that exists underneath all of this. About it being worth finding. He held her gaze. I think not destroying a 71-year-old man who is afraid is part of finding it. Elena breathed out through her nose, something that wasn't quite a laugh, but was in the same neighborhood. Something that acknowledged the distance traveled. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 4 years, she said. I'm aware. It took a lot. It took more than I expected. He looked at her across the table. I'm not asking you to come back. I want to say that clearly. I'm not here asking for anything. I drove up last night because you were in danger, and I flew back this morning because... He stopped. Because I wanted to sit at this table and tell you it was over and not be alone with it. Elena looked at the window, at the morning light on the water visible through the glass, at the smoke rising from the chimney visible from inside as a faint shadow. The baby is going to need both of us, she said. I know. Not in the same house, not in the same life, but both of us, present and functional and not at war. She looked back at him. Can you do that? Yes. Not as the Don, not as a man managing an asset, as a father. Yes. He said it without hesitation or performance, just yes. Then we figure out the rest, she said, slowly, on terms we both agree to this time. She picked up her mug. I'm not coming back to Manhattan, not to the residence. If we agree on access arrangements for when the baby comes, they happen on neutral ground. This isn't me punishing you. It's me protecting what I've built here. This distance, this quiet. I need it. And I need you to respect it even when it's inconvenient. I will. Even when the family needs you to project something different, even when having a wife who lives separately in Maine doesn't fit the image. The image, he said, has cost me enough. She looked at him steadily. I believe you, she said. I want to be clear. Believing you and trusting you are different things, and the trust takes time. But I believe you mean what you're saying right now. That's enough, he said. Right now, that's enough. He stayed through the morning. Not for any operational reason, not because there was anything left to negotiate or manage or construct. He stayed because she made breakfast, eggs and toast from the farmer's market bread, and he sat at the small table and ate it, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with the Moretti family or Ferrano or Desmond or the Cavallo account. She told him about the town, about the couple at the property management company who had a dog named Harold that she'd been feeding scraps of bread on her walks, about the prenatal clinic 40 miles south where the midwife was a direct, practical woman named Garrett, who Elena liked because she gave information without softening it. He listened, he asked questions, actual questions, not strategic ones, not questions designed to extract useful information, questions because he wanted to know the answers. What was the farmer's market like? What did she eat for dinner usually? Whether she'd found anywhere to walk that wasn't the 40-minute road to town. She answered them with visible, careful attention to whether they were genuine. He could see her doing it, watching for the familiar pattern of the managed interest, the performative engagement, and finding, this time, something different, something that was slower and less polished and more real. Around 10 in the morning, he stood to leave. She walked him to the door. He stopped on the porch. The morning was cold and clear, the ocean visible down the slope of the coast road, steel blue now with the sun up and the sky opened. Harold the dog from the management company was visible on the road below, following someone on a walk. The legal structure, he said. The separation agreement. I want you to have it done by your attorneys, not mine. Yours. People you've chosen who represent your interests. Whatever you decide you need, I'll sign it. Elena looked at him. Not because I've lost, he said, because it's right. She looked at him for a long moment in the morning light, and something in her expression did what it hadn't done yet. Something small and careful and real, like a door opened just enough to confirm that there was a room on the other side. Go run your empire, she said. It's a smaller empire than it was last week, he said. Good, she said. Smaller empires are easier to be human inside. He went down the porch steps. He was halfway down the gravel path when she spoke again, and he turned. Adrian, she said, if it's a boy, I'd like to name him Adrian. If that's Adrian James, he said, what he'd read in the letter, what he'd been carrying since Maine the first time. Yes. She nodded, folded her arms against the cold. He turned and kept walking. But to Mum. 3 weeks later, Desmond Vale resigned his position as consigliere of the Moretti family in a letter delivered through his personal attorney. The letter acknowledged certain financial irregularities and expressed a willingness to cooperate fully with the family's internal audit. The Cavallo instruments were unwound over 22 days. The money did not go to Desmond. The legal consequences of the account structure were sufficient, and the protection of the Moretti name was withdrawn, and Desmond Vale moved to a small house in Connecticut, owned by a cousin, and did not attend any family functions again. Lucian never spoke to him directly. He found, when he examined the decision, that he had nothing left to say to the man. Anger required energy he was spending elsewhere. The empty space where the anger should have been felt, after a while, like something that had been set down at the right time. The warehouse district renegotiation opened on a Tuesday morning in November, in a neutral conference room in Philadelphia. Both families sent representatives. The Moretti representative was a young woman named Castillo, who Lucian had been watching develop for 2 years, and who was better at this kind of negotiation than anyone else in the organization because she had the specific skill of making the other side feel like they'd been heard. The Ferrano representative was Adriano's cousin, a methodical man who came with documentation and used it. The conversation was tense and long and ended the first session without resolution and reconvened the following week and was resolved 6 weeks later with a partition adjustment that gave the Ferrano family 15% more of the corridor revenue in exchange for expanded operational responsibility in the northern segment. It was not a comfortable agreement for the Moretti side. It was a fair one. Lucian reviewed it and signed it on a Friday afternoon in December, sitting at his desk in Manhattan with the winter light coming through the windows and the city below doing what it always did. He did not feel like he had surrendered. He felt very quietly like he had done something correct. The call came at 4:17 in the morning on a Wednesday in late November. Rivera, who was still running the passive watch in Maine at Lucian's request, sent a text first. "It's time." Then Elena called. Her voice was controlled and clipped, and he could hear behind it the specific kind of breathing that meant she was managing something large with the part of herself that managed things. "I'm at the clinic. Garrett says it's moving fast. I'm coming. You don't have to—" Elena. A pause. Then, "All right." He was in the air in 40 minutes. The clinic was a low white building 40 miles south of the cottage, set back from the road behind a line of bare November trees. Rivera met him in the parking lot. The sky was just starting to go gray at the edge. "She's been here 2 hours," Rivera said. "Midwife says it's close." Lucian went inside. The room was small and warm, and the midwife, Garrett, looked at him when he came in with the specific assessment of someone who had spent 30 years determining whether the people who showed up in her rooms were going to be useful or not. She apparently decided he was tolerable because she nodded once and moved aside. Elena was in the bed. She was pale and exhausted, and her hair was loose, and there was sweat at her temples. And she looked at him when he came in with an expression that had no performance in it at all, just raw and present, and somewhere between relieved and annoyed. "You actually came," she said. "I said I would. You said a lot of things." "I know." He pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down. He reached for her hand. She looked at his hand for a moment, the specific moment of deciding, and then took it. "This is going to be terrible for another hour," she said. "I know." "You don't have to say anything." "I know. Just—" She stopped as something moved through her, something that required all of her attention for 10 seconds. And he held her hand through it and said nothing because he understood, finally, that presence was not about what you said, that the most useful thing you could do for another person in the hardest moments was simply be there, in the room, without an agenda or a framework or a managed response. Just there. He was there. Adrian James Moretti was born at 6:42 in the morning. He was 7 pounds, 4 ounces, and he came into the world with the particular objection of someone who had not asked for this and wanted it known. Garrett caught him with the calm efficiency of a woman who had been doing this for 3 decades and was not impressed by the drama of it. Lucian stood up. He didn't move immediately. He stood at the side of the room and watched and felt something in his chest that was not, he realized, anything he had a name for. He'd spent 20 years building a vocabulary for power and strategy and threat and leverage, and none of it had a word for what happened to a man who watches his child arrive in the world for the first time, screaming and small and absolutely indifferent to everything he'd built. Garrett cleaned the baby and wrapped him and turned and looked at Lucian. "You want to hold him," she said. Not a question, an assessment. "Yes," he said. She placed the bundle in his arms. He'd held things carefully before. Weapons, documents, breakable things. He held his son with all of that care and none of those associations, and felt the weight of him. A different weight than anything he'd carried. A weight that had nothing to do with mass and everything to do with what it meant. The baby's eyes were closed. His face was new and old simultaneously, the way babies look, ancient and just arrived. His hand, when Lucian touched it carefully with one finger, was very small, with fingernails like something made by a watchmaker. Lucian stood there and held his son and did not speak. From the bed, Elena watched him. He looked up and found her watching, and the expression on her face was something he would carry for the rest of his life. exhausted and clear-eyed and carrying within it all 4 years of everything that had happened between them. The full weight of it, without the bitterness resolved into something that didn't have a name, but was true. He brought the baby to her. She took him and held him against her chest and looked down at him, and something in her face went completely quiet. Lucian sat back in the chair beside the bed. The room was very still. Outside the window, the November sky was getting lighter by degrees. That slow, accumulating light of early mornings, the kind that doesn't arrive all at once but builds, each minute slightly brighter than the last, until at some point you realize the dark is gone, and you couldn't say exactly when it left. He stayed in Maine for 4 days. He slept in the motel. He came to the clinic in the mornings and stayed through the afternoons. He held Adrian and learned how to hold him, how to support the head, how to angle the body, how to move without disturbing the specific gravity of a sleeping infant. He was bad at it at first and got less bad slowly, which was the only way to get better at things that mattered. Elena watched him figure it out. She didn't help him unnecessarily. She let him find it himself, which was the right instinct. Some things couldn't be transferred, could only be discovered through the doing of them. On the 3rd day, he brought coffee from a place 2 towns over that Marco had found online, and that turned out to be good, genuinely good, and Elena held the cup in both hands and closed her eyes for a moment in the specific way of someone receiving something small and real. "This is good," she said. "I'll find out where they get the beans." She looked at him. "You don't have to—" "I know." He looked at his son in her arms. "I want to." She looked at the coffee, looked at Adrian, looked at Lucian. "He has your hands," she said. He looked, the baby's hands loosely curled at rest against Elena's chest. "He has your jaw," he said. "Let's hope that's all he inherits from either of us." He almost smiled. She almost smiled back. He drove back to New York on the 4th day. The drive south was different from the drive north 3 weeks ago, when he'd been in the dark with nothing but a pinned location and the knowledge that something was already wrong. Now it was a Tuesday morning in late November, gray and cold, the trees stripped of their October color and standing bare and honest against the sky, the way bare trees always do, as if the beauty was a distraction they'd shed to show what was underneath. He drove without music. He thought about Desmond in his Connecticut house. He thought about Ferrano in his Boston building, watching the numbers come through from the warehouse district revision. He thought about Marco, who had found something 3 weeks before he'd told Lucian about it, and with whom he'd had a long, uncomfortable conversation the previous week that ended with the understanding intact but changed, like something repaired that would always carry the mark of the break. He thought about Elena in the cottage, which she would return to tomorrow, Adrian in a car seat carefully installed by Rivera, who had apparently, somewhere in his career, developed opinions about infant car seat installation. He thought about the legal framework that Elena's attorneys would begin drafting next week, and which he would sign without revision. He thought about what he was returning to. Not the same organization. The audit had found 3 additional instruments that needed adjustment. Nothing as significant as Cavallo, but evidence of the kind of accumulated slack that develops inside any large structure when the person at the top trusts too absolutely and checks too rarely. He was fixing them, one by one, with Castillo running the internal review and Marco running the operational side, and the 2 of them working well together in the way of people who are both good at their jobs and have each been given clear expectations. He was running the organization differently, not completely differently. He was still who he was, and his world was still what it was. And the idea that a man in his position could simply walk away from 2 decades of infrastructure was a fairy tale that he had no interest in. But differently. Slower to command, faster to hear, less interested in the performance of control, more interested in whether the thing he was building was worth the cost of building it. He didn't have a full answer to that last question yet. He suspected it was the kind of question that answered itself over years, through accumulated choices, through the small daily decisions about who you were willing to be when it cost you something. He was willing to keep making those decisions. The city came into view in the early afternoon, the skyline emerging from the flat gray distance, enormous and indifferent and his. He drove into it. He went to the office. He met with Castillo and Marco and looked at the week's operational summary and made 3 decisions and delegated the rest and was out of the building by 5, which he couldn't remember doing in 20 years. He drove to a restaurant near the park, not one of the places where he was known, not somewhere with a private room and practiced discretion, just a restaurant. He sat at a regular table and ordered food and ate it alone and looked out the window at the city going about its evening. And it was not dramatic, and it was not a resolution, and it was not the end of anything. It was just a Tuesday. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, that was enough. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in May, Lucian Moretti drove 4 hours north in a car with no driver and a coffee in the cup holder and arrived at a cottage at the end of a gravel road with birch trees along the track and the ocean visible through the gaps. He had called ahead. Elena had told him Adrian was awake and had been for 2 hours and was, in her words, interested in everything and objecting to most of it. He knocked. She opened the door. Adrian was in her arms, 6 months old now, with Lucian's hands and Elena's jaw and eyes that were still deciding what color they would be. He looked at Lucian with the absolute, unfiltered attention of someone who had not yet learned to look at anything partially. Lucian looked back at him. "Hey," he said. The baby stared at him. Elena watched them both. Lucian held out his hands. Adrian considered the offer with great seriousness for approximately 4 seconds. Then he reached out and grabbed Lucian's index finger and held on, and the grip was surprisingly strong for something so small. And Lucian stood in the doorway of the cottage with the ocean behind him and his son's hand around his finger and understood, without needing to examine it, that this was the thing he'd been building toward for 20 years without knowing it. Not the empire. This. "Come in," Elena said. "It's cold." He came in. She closed the door, and the morning continued. Quiet, ordinary, irreplaceable. The way mornings do when you've finally learned to be present for them.